OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Eoin, Sheahan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ger. What's the crack?
Is there a German word for that feeling where you're sad about stuff that's happening even though you know it's about to finish, but you should be enjoying it because it hasn't finished yet, but you're still sad because you know it's about to finish? That's how I felt listening to the final edition of Off the Bull on my way in. I know it's not the final edition, or maybe it is because you kind of... I haven't reached the end of it yet, so don't spoil it for me. Don't spoil the end of the podcast that you recorded this week. It's the last bit of Last Dance stuff that I'm kind of portioning out for myself. Two quick questions for you because we don't have much time before we get into Jordy Murphy here. Why did they not bring up the Hall of Fame? You've got Michael Jordan sitting there, trapped, essentially, for the first time in his life. He's caged. And you can ask him about the Hall of Fame speech. Right? Like, in the final episode, they're going to get to the Hall of Fame speech, and we'll find out, like, he settled scores with Jerry Krause in the audience. So it's still relevant to The Last Dance because it's the end of The Last Dance. Unless I missed it last night.
Yeah.
And I was a bit tired.
No.
Did I miss the bit?
No,
Okay, I didn't.
It's very abrupt ending, isn't it? It's 98, The Last Dance. Once that dance has been danced, it's all over. It's a full stop. That Hall of Fame speech, by the way, is amazing for anybody who hasn't seen it. It's worth taking out on YouTube. I just watched it before the series started. And he destroys everybody from his high school coach. He gets the guy who beat him to that high school team to sit in the crowd and point at him and say, "You're the guy who drove me on to the next level because I didn't make the high school team, and you did, and you were crap, and I was one of the greatest players of all time." And then, of course, as you say, he had to go at Jerry Krause as well. So it was peak Jordan settling scores for sure.
And where does him crying, where does that meme come from? The real one, the first one?
From that speech.
Oh, okay, so it isn't that speech. Grant. Okay. Because everybody was talking about Jordan crying. I can't remember who it was 8 or 9, the episode. But, like, there's the bit where you hear him on the ground on Father's Day crying, which is some of the best footage I've ever seen. And you're like, at that point, I am completely on his side. He has won me over. Despite everything, up to that point, I'm back on board. And I'm like, all right, okay. Oh, my God, that's terrible.
Yeah, apparently the audio of that wasn't well circulated before. Like, I'd seen the picture all right, but I'd seen a few American journalists tweeting that they themselves, people who'd been on the beat for Chicago, hadn't actually heard the audio, which makes that clip so much more powerful. Yeah,
I think that's the thing. Because, like, you see a picture of somebody prone with a trophy, they could be like, woo, rolling around like Homer Simpson, or you hear somebody crying like all of the pent-up grief. It's grief that's coming out in that moment, and that was unbelievable TV, really. I would agree with the general sentiment of Off the Bull that the final episode not very good, rushed, and so nowhere near as good as it needed to be. But then, you've got to take a step back and look at the other 10 episodes. The podcast has been absolutely sensational. If you haven't listened to it, you're missing out, and it is a brilliant accompaniment to The Last Dance. So wherever you are in The Last Dance, there is a partner piece in the podcast. Jarlath Regan, Kieran Donaghy, Ronan Mullen and Eoin every week have been recapping it. Are you going to do one more next week?
One more, unless I've got commitment issues to actually commit to putting it out next week. But no, I think we're going to do some version of an awards ceremony next week. Probably just a short, snappy half hour Off the Bull to put a full stop on things. Or as we said at the end of the podcast last week, it would be fitting to The Last Dance if we just pulled the plug now and didn't tell anyone we weren't coming back, because that's kind of how The Last Dance ends. In my opinion, perfect ending. I was kind of out on my own. The other 3 lads hated the ending. I thought it was really good.
Well, apparently he could have signed for loads of different teams, and there was opportunities, and no one would pay him the money, and nobody really wanted him, and he wanted to. Look, there's loads of other great. And I think the conspiracy theory, we could have that conversation a little bit later on. Anyway, I won't do it now because I'm getting shouted at for being a little bit late. A really busy show for you today. Keith Wood's State of the Union this week has Andrew Mehrtens and Michael Cheika, so it is A-listers in terms of World Rugby. We're going to talk about the situation, specifically more in Australia than New Zealand. They both actually live in Sydney. That's coming your way after 9 o'clock this morning. Mary O'Connor from the Federation of Irish Sports is going to talk to us about the Resilience Fund that they're lobbying the government on behalf of. We saw yesterday a couple of boxing clubs go to the wall because they can't actually afford to pay their rent. This is going to be repeated right across the country, and suddenly a network of community facilities and architecture is going to disappear in the space of a couple of weeks. Is there anything that we as a country can do, and what should we be doing to try and prevent that? So that's coming your way after 8 o'clock today. But first we're going to bring you this. It's Jordy Murphy last night speaking with Joe on Wednesday Night Rugby.
the ruck just is a vicious enough environment, and unfortunately sometimes you pick up knocks, and over a long span of a career you're going to pick them up here and there. So definitely the back row is a pretty attritional spot to be in.
Are there any obvious or easier ways to clean up the ruck? I mean, it is the lifeblood of the game, and you're a Joe Schmidt disciple. I'm sure he talks about the ruck as being everything really and so important. You want to keep it because it's so integral to what the game is, and yet you would like to make it some way safer for back rows and others getting their heads stuck in a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. Like, sure, you've got experts trying to do it and they still can't do it. So it's more, the only thing would be just they just have to sometimes be a bit better about clearing in off the side. Like, they talk about it every year. They're like, oh, we're going to penalise people coming in the side. And in fairness, they do a lot of the time, but some of the times you're just there thinking, like, how is that not called? I just think that has to be top of the list going forward and forever, really, because if you're going, like, head on, like, if you're doing it with right technique, you should be fine. But it's just people coming in from the side. That's where I picked up injuries before. So
I think Dan Levy as well was in from the side, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What about your game? What are you, in your own mind, not to blow your own trumpet, what are you naturally good at? What are your strengths? And then what are the things that you have to work really hard at, or coaches might tell you need to improve on?
I think my reading of the game would be quite good. So just kind of even seeing things just before they're about to play out and just trying to be in the right place at the right time. I suppose it's a pretty general thing to say, but
no, that's interesting because it's actually a hard thing to measure statistically, and to watch a game and know who's seeing things and who's not.
Yeah. So, like, I've always considered myself to be quite fit, so just to have that kind of level of, how would you say it, even just to have that engine for 80 minutes, kind of not give up sort of thing. But then there's plenty that I can certainly work on, and I've been told plenty of times, and try to work on it with like. So when I first came onto the scene, my carrying would have probably been one of my main strengths, and in the last couple of years probably come away from that a bit, just trying to worry about certain things like, getting there to the breakdown first, making sure we get clear and secure ball. It's making the right decisions at the right time, making sure that I can get involved in all aspects of the game, not just certain parts. So sometimes I would have found myself just kind of going through games and having plenty of involvements, but not real impactful involvements. So, and one of the main things for that would be obviously anytime you do carry the ball, to come onto it at pace and kind of good leg drive and things like that. So that's certainly something that I've chatted to plenty of coaches about in the last kind of year or two, and something that I'm trying to work on all the time. So people like Dwayne Peel and coaches like that, Dan Soper at Ulster, have been trying to help me in the last year or two to improve on that. And I've seen glimpses of it, definitely, but it's something that I definitely need to work on. So it's one of the things I would have spoken to, say, Andy Farrell about when he rang me around Christmas when I wasn't picked in the squad. He said, like, I can't fault your effort. I can't fault the effort you're putting in games, and kind of you're keeping going and stuff. But it's not just trying to stay on, say, a level path for the whole way. It's kind of spiking at certain points, whether that be on both sides of the ball, attacking or defending. Just being more impactful in the game. Just going through it.
So instead of a perfect 7 out of 10 for the whole 80 minutes, maybe a 6 out of 10 for part of it, and then hit a 9 out of 10 here and there.
Yeah, exactly. Just realising that, say, for example, we're talking about clean ruck ball and speed of ball and things like that. Like, I don't have to take that on myself to do it for the whole entire team, get to every single ruck, and maybe not be as impactful. Like, so securing ruck ball and things like that, but then in other facets of my game kind of dwindling away. It's kind of being able to contribute in all areas of the game, not just one.
It's interesting what you said about the carrying there. Certainly for a large part of your career, you would have heard Joe Schmidt talking about being the 60% man when it came to, if you're carrying into contact, it's really important you recycle the ball. Maybe you kind of forget in the midst of that, actually, maybe I should try and beat a man here or make more yards, and I'll worry about the breakdown and the ruck when I'm brought to ground a little bit more. I wonder, is that part of your thinking as well? Because the breakdown was such a part of those Irish teams.
Yeah, definitely. I came into play for Joe in 2011, and then it got to about 2013, and Matt O'Connor came in, and I really flourished, I think, under Matt, because he wasn't about look, there's a lot of positives and a lot of negatives with the way Matt played the game. Like he wanted to attack the whole time, and there wasn't so much emphasis on like the 60% man sort of things. It was very much trying to beat people, footwork, things like that. And like we trained that the whole time, and I thought like that definitely helped my game on that side of things. And then maybe when you go back to Joe's sort of coaching, it was a lot more structured. It was not so much about you. It was more about the group as the collective. And as you said, 60% man. And sometimes you don't have to go into contact to try and smash through someone or try and beat them. It's more about if you can give us clean ruck ball now with your actions on the ground, we can get it and then beat them a phase or two later by just stretching the defence. And so I suppose it's the perfect storm of being able to do both.
Yeah.
Certain times, obviously, you're not going to, like, very good defenders, or you just don't get the ball at the right pace. You're just not going to be able to beat people, and it's about recycling and doing it well. But it's not always about doing that. Like, I think that's one of the things that, look, I'm going on a bit here, but probably the Irish team from 2018 to around the World Cup there, we didn't really develop. We stayed in that place where we were so good at being structured, and we were able to break down teams because they just couldn't deal with how quick our ball was and the structure of that. But then when teams started to kind of adapt and realize how they might be able to beat us, we didn't develop from there. So it's definitely about continuously developing and being able to mix like different styles of play, not just stick to one because you know you're very good at it. It's about developing the whole time because everyone else is developing, trying to beat you.
Yeah, 2019 was maybe a perfect storm in a bad way in that respect, in that the Irish team had become so good at what they were doing. And, you know, it's not like when the calendar year went from 2018 into 19, anybody, media included, were saying, well, we really need to change what we're doing here and start playing a different way. You know, it was working so well. And what often happens in a World Cup year is other teams really sit down and look at other teams. And with Ireland number one in the world, that was going to happen in a big way. And I have some sympathy because I suspect come summertime, when it was really apparent post Six Nations that, you know, a bit of a change up might have been good. Geez, you're on a tight turnaround there. Like, you're not going to perfect a new style of play too easily in that time frame.
Yeah, I think you're pretty much spot on there. It's hard to come away from something when you've been so good at it and it's been working so well. And like you said, number one in the world, beat the All Blacks, Grand Slam. And then you come back and you think, right, well, we just need to do that better. But then people try and develop ways to beat you, and they were doing that. And then, yeah, it did come to the summer, and it was very much, God, I don't know if 2 or 3 months is going to be able to change this. And then so much faith in someone like Joe, because to be honest, he's been the greatest Irish coach of all time. Like, we've had unprecedented success under him, and you just think, right, well, we'll just stick to what the main man's saying. And unfortunately, it just didn't work because other teams just really raised their game. And like you said, we had a bit of a bullseye on our back because we were number one in the world, and people want to knock us off our perch, and unfortunately they did, but that's just the way it went.
He always liked you. It felt, you know, at Leinster, he gave you your chances. 2015 World Cup, you went to that. You were on the pitch. You started the Chicago game against the All Blacks. There was a real sense he trusted you to carry out the job, the detailed job he would lay before the team. 2019, when he gives you that quick phone call to say, look, I'm sorry, you're not in. Was that a big surprise to you, or did you feel you were touch and go to be in anyway?
Well, if I'm being honest, I looked at the kind of, there must have been 6 or 7 of us, and you knew Pete was going, CJ was going, Josh was going, and then Jack Conan, you probably thought was going, just he'd been playing so well the previous season. So thought it was kind of between myself, Reece, and Tommy O'Donnell. So I always knew that the phone call was possible to come, but and it did, unfortunately. He rang me on my Irish number, which I nearly did. So I've had a UK phone the last kind of year and a half, 2 years, and that's the one I use 99% of the time. But on that day, I was kind of like, I better just turn on my Irish number just in case. And unfortunately, he ended up ringing that phone. So, but yeah, look, it was tough. Like, I won't lie, it's probably the worst feeling I've ever had. Like, I've been dropped plenty of times before, but I suppose it was a mix of a lot of things. Like, when I decided to leave Leinster, it was around the November series of 2017. Yeah. So he'd rang me and just said, look, you're not playing enough. Need you to play more Champions Cup and things like that. And I kind of knew, right, well, if I want to play for Ireland, I could see the World Cup on the horizon. I was like, I need to make a move. So that was playing in my mind. That was one of the main reasons why I knew I had to leave. And then you kind of spend 18 months and felt like I was playing some pretty decent rugby. And then you go through the whole summer camp for the World Cup and feeling in good shape. And you're kind of there thinking you're like literally one step away. And unfortunately, you just fall at the final hurdle. And yeah, it was tough to take because I'd been to a World Cup. I know how special that is to go. Been a goal of mine. Well, it's always been a goal of mine to go to World Cups. And even after the last one, I was like, I'd love to go to another one. But really set in stone in my mind for the kind of 18 months, 2 years before. And then to be told that you haven't quite made it, that's pretty rough. So, yeah, it was a rough kind of week or two. Rough for my poor fiancée, Laura, as well.
I'm sure it's horrific. I presume when you see your Irish phone ringing and his name comes up, you think to yourself, well, you're not ringing me to tell me I'm in.
No, I think that's only happened once in the history of phone calls, and that was to Tommy Bowe before the 2015 World Cup. Someone was telling me, so no, I had a feeling. I just answered the phone. I was barely said hello, and he was like, yeah, this isn't a phone call I want to make. And I just didn't say anything. I just let him talk for 2 or 3 minutes, and there wasn't much to be said. I wasn't going to be kind of having an art kind of.
Yeah, you're not going to change his mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You obviously went out, and then I think you hurt your rib as well. And the Russia game, was it? You had very little time, and you went out, and so was the experience. I don't know what adjective to use. Was the experience good in any way?
Yeah, I suppose culturally the experience is pretty good in Japan, but it was a strange one. Look, like obviously to not be in, and then 3 weeks later, like what happens in rugby, someone picks up an injury and you get called upon. And so Dan rang me. I was meant to play Ospreys on a Friday night, and Dan McFarlane rang me as I was having a coffee in the morning, and just said Joe Schmidt's rang there. Jack Conan's picked up a knock, and so he's going to fly someone out tomorrow after the Japan game or whatever. So he didn't say it was 100% going to be me, but he just said that there's a good chance I can't play you tonight and you just got to wait. So that was a pretty nerve-wracking kind of 24 hours waiting for that phone call. But yeah, look, flew out, was obviously very excited to be there. As I was on the phone to Joe on the Saturday, I think it was, that Japan game was, and he just said, look, be out here by, I don't know when I got there, maybe it was Monday, and he said I was going to be playing on the Thursday, so I knew there wasn't much time to kind of get my head around things. Which is probably a good thing, because I knew I had to try and knock the jet lag as quickly as I could and just get back up and running with the plays and stuff. So some of the boys sent me across some stuff through WhatsApp and kind of tried to learn things on the flight over. Look, like adrenaline was getting me through that game. I was wrecked, but I was just excited to be there. Even on the walk out, and you hear the World Cup music, and you're like, this is incredible. Like 4 or 5 days ago, I was sitting at home watching one of these games and actually playing in it. But yeah, by 25 minutes in, whatever happened, I was stuck in a mall, and I just got hit in the side by one of the Russian fellas, and I just felt something go, and I knew straight away. And I was kind of like, I've popped ribs before, but this was pretty bad. And I was just thinking, right, let's try get to half time here. So this is like 25 minutes in. So I can definitely get to half time. And then maybe 3 or 4 minutes later, I was running around, and there was a ruck, and the ball kind of came out, and it was between me and a Russian fella. And I was maybe half a metre closer to the ball than he was, and I couldn't get over to the ball. And I just kind of knew, like, I'm not much use here. Like, he just picked up the ball and kind of ran around me. So I just had to call it in then, which was very disappointing. Like, in the change room, I was kind of thinking, I can't believe this is happening. Like, I've got here 72 hours before, and I might be on a plane back in a day or two. Anyway, I got a scan, and whatever I'd done to the cartilage and stuff in the ribs, they managed to just keep me there and just look after me for the 2 or 3. Like, I could have played a game, definitely, but I wasn't fit by any means. Yeah. But I just kind of just grinned and said that I was fine every time I got poked and prodded at by the physios, which is what you have to do if you want to stay there. So anyway, look, it was an experience. It was just a strange one. Obviously, it wasn't the fairy tale ending we would have all liked, but I still got there. So I suppose I can take some comfort in that.
Schmidt was such a big part of your career. Do you send him a message of any kind? Do you say anything to him? Or is professional rugby one of these strange environments where it's like we're all passing ships in the night in a way and don't say too much to each other?
Well, I haven't spoken to him now since we got back from the World Cup, but straight after that New Zealand game, I just went over to him and just said, like, thanks a million, like, it's been great. And he straight away said, no, thank you for 10 years. So
it's a long time.
Yeah, and when he said that, that really kind of hit home. I was kind of like, wow, yeah, like, I can't believe he's, I suppose, been a big part of my life for the 10 previous years. Like, he gave me my first Leinster cap, as you say, gave me my first Irish cap. Like, I've coached me for near on 10 years. So, yeah, it was a strange one. I haven't spoken to him since now, but I'm sure next time we meet, we'll only have pleasant words to say to each other. Like, look, he was incredibly good coach, incredibly demanding coach, but I suppose to be that good, you've got to have incredibly high standards. So, yeah.
I had a quick glance at your Twitter before we finish up, and the two cultural giants of the COVID time have been Last Dance and Normal People. And you, Jordy Murphy, have not been immune to either. So I just have you finished Last Dance? I just finished it last night.
Yeah, I did. I watched it yesterday as well. So
you were all in on this. Michael Jordan as a teammate, would you absolutely fine with that? You'd have liked that? You'd have welcomed that, or unnecessary?
I've been thinking about this. So I tried to think about someone that I could probably compare to him with that kind of drive and like everything he puts into it, and then the level of performance he was probably able to bring out any time he played. And the only person that I could think about, well, I've had some incredible teammates, but like someone that really like sticks in my mind, especially because, so it was Paul O'Connell, because he was captain when I first went into Ireland, and just to see his level of dedication, the fact he'd never leave anything to chance, he was always doing extras to keep his body in check, always doing extra video. Just anytime he said something, you listened. Any piece of advice he'd give you, you just make sure you take that on board, because the guy's been a Lions Test Series captain. He's played for Ireland over 100 times. Just an incredible like athlete, incredible competitor. But then when I tried to compare him to, say, like Michael Jordan, but like I could actually get on with Paulie, like people could get on with him. He was just an incredibly humble guy, an incredibly nice guy, funny, just and then I couldn't really compare it, because you saw someone like Michael Jordan that could, he'd take people to new heights, but he'd also he did belittle a lot of people around him. Just didn't seem like the nicest guy in the world. But sure, whatever episode it was where he starts getting emotional at the end because he's like, this, if you wanted to do what if you wanted to be the best in the world, that's what you had to do.
I couldn't work out if his tears at that were that he still thinks, yeah, you do have to be an asshole, and I'm sad that's the way it is, or if maybe there was some part of him maybe thinking, well, maybe I didn't have to quite belittle people the way I did, and there was a tinge of regret. I suspect he feels he did need to be more the asshole side, but the tears were interesting. Yeah,
I think they were maybe tears because he still feels maybe a little bit misunderstood.
Yeah.
From where he was coming, but I don't know. Look, pretty incredible documentary though, to be able to have an insight like that. Like when I first heard about it and I was told it's documenting his last season playing for the Bulls, I thought, oh, that'd be great. But the fact that they were able to flash back to the previous kind of playoff years and other times in his life, it was just incredible.
Yeah. Steve Kerr is the hero for me.
Yeah, he comes up trumps there in the last two episodes.
And just like the perfect type of teammate that every team needs, and you need a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, he said it himself, didn't he? He was a role player and he knew that, and he just kind of mastered it. Like I knew a lot about Steve Kerr because I love basketball and I've been watching, obviously, maybe the last 7 or 8 years, really got into it. And obviously I knew about his coaching side of things with the Golden State Warriors, but like to see what he managed to achieve as a player as well, just shows you as well, because I didn't really know that before. I knew he'd won a bit, but like his accolades are pretty incredible, and to be able to transfer that over to a coaching side of things is a pretty impressive guy. And even when you look at his humble beginnings and his family and all that trauma that he had growing up, it's a pretty incredible story as well.
Yeah. Normal People. Had you read the book?
Nope. I didn't even know there was a book until I started watching it.
Okay. I was going to ask you what you preferred. It's amazing the impact it's had. Like it is. I know. An insane effect on people. I don't know if it's because we're all in lockdown and feeling more emotional and vulnerable and thinking about things, or if it would have happened anyway, but it's just amazing.
Yeah. No, I thought it was brilliant. I didn't know what to make of it before watching it. I'd kind of seen one or two of the ads and I was thinking, I don't know if I'd be into that. And then
all that kind of nudity and stuff. Were you ringing Liveline?
No, well, that wasn't quite me. I can't put on that good old lady voice. But yeah, no, I started watching it with Laura, and straight away it was like, wow, this is pretty incredible. I suppose that the acting's incredible. They're so believable, the two of them, and you're kind of rooting for them the whole time, but they can't communicate between themselves really. Like they can communicate about so many things, and then when it actually comes to expressing their feelings and stuff, they just can't do it. And I suppose maybe it's a bit relatable to a lot of people. I like at some stages during the show, I was like, Jesus, more nudity here. I'm glad I wasn't watching it with my parents anyway. But no, it was definitely a great show. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it was really good. I had seen Paul Mescal in the Gaiety like a month before lockdown in The Lieutenant of Inishmore, and he was fantastic, and he plays a very loud character who has no trouble expressing himself. Now he's a bit of a madman, but like real in-your-face character. It was brilliant, and I remember thinking, that guy's good. It's like the poor fella, you never see him on TV or anything, and now he's just exploded, but in a character that is so opposite to the one I'd seen him play, which is probably the real marker of serious talent. What a weird experience for him in lockdown to go from obscurity to the most Googled man in the world last week.
Was he? Yeah. I tweeted when he, because I saw he was on the Late Late Show, and I tweeted something like, the queue outside his house must be huge now when they hear that he's self-isolating alone. But yeah, it must be an incredibly strange feeling, like you said, go from like people didn't really know who he was. No. I saw the other day he was kind of over 500,000 Instagram followers, and you just said it there, that he's the most Googled man in the world last week. Must be pretty incredible, and to have to do it from the comfort of your apartment somewhere in London must be even stranger.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, listen, read the book actually over the next few weeks and see what you think. You get a lot out of it. It's kind of interesting to see the two side by side. So 2 more years at Ulster. I guess you hope things get back soon, and we wish you well. Stay safe. And Jordy Murphy, been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The question ultimately is, where do we go from here? I mean, where do we go from here?
OTB Sports Radio.
I drunk texted Joe Smith, "Tu sma Latin Hebra," and he obviously just threw it into like Google Translate or something, because he's like, thanks Danny. Yeah, the first half was good actually.
Now broadcasting 24 hours a day, live on the Go Loud app, Alexa.
You have a whole new world of possibilities.
Google Home, tune in, and offtheball.com/radio.
This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
And a very good morning to you. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It is Thursday, the 21st of May, and it is, exactly 2 minutes past 8 this morning. You're very welcome along. Myself and Eoin with you every morning from 7:30 until 10. If you want to get involved in the conversation, you can use WhatsApp, 087 9180 180, or we're on whatever social media channel you want. Use the hashtag OTBAM. Eoin, how are you getting on?
All good. How are you?
I'm good. Interesting stuff from Jordy Murphy there. Paul O'Connell was the closest person that he could think of as being Jordan-esque. I do think that they've picked all the bad bits from Jordan and none of the bits where there's just normal stuff happening and he's actually a perfectly fine human being. I think that they've decided, we're going to make him a bit of an ass in this, and we're going to pick all those bits and we're going to edit it like that. And I think that was kind of one of the kickbacks that we saw, was it yesterday, the day before, was like, well, you never see us going back at him, but we go back at him all the time. Like Dave Stockton saying, he didn't have an aura. We were going there to win the game. And they played like they were going there to win the game. He was just better than them. It wasn't this kind of weird sense of, oh my God, he is a God. I can't touch him. I can't tackle him. There's people going head to head with him in matches. Like, when you hype up something in a 10-part documentary series, you're immediately putting them on a pedestal. But, he still puts his socks on the same way everybody else does.
Yeah, I think with John Stockton, John Stockton got inducted to the Hall of Fame the same night Michael Jordan did. I don't think that was one of the things that the documentary really gave people an appreciation of, was just how good he was. So I don't think Stockton had a kind of a sense of an aura of anybody he came up against, because he was literally one of the best point guards to ever play the game. But I don't know, though. I'm not sure if I agree with that it went out of their way to actually give a view of Jordan that perhaps wasn't overly true. I agree that there wasn't a lot of blowback from teammates, which probably did exist, but there are little things that are kind of below the surface that say a lot more, like the fact that he just chills out with the security guards all the time. He doesn't really have any mates on the team. That clip that's going viral of him, or it's totally memed at the moment, with him listening to music, there's kind of an isolated nature to that as well. He just seemed like a bit of a loner in the Bulls camp, to be honest.
He's playing cards with people. He's playing cards with people.
Take their money.
I know, but he's playing with them. They continue to play with them. So at one stage, he's listening to music so he can brag about the fact he has the music before everybody else. What a name dropper. I got it before everybody else. It's not out yet. Do you understand the implication of what I'm saying? The man has a giant ego, but I do think that the comparisons with Keane in this come into it, where he's a fine teammate most of the time, but there are certain moments, particularly in the hour before tip-off, where he's getting at people, Scott, going, I'm going to be on you. I'm going to beat you up the next time I see you if we don't win this game tonight.
It's interesting that Jordy Murphy didn't say Johnny Sexton there and he picked Paul O'Connell.
Why do you think that was? Because in your head, is Johnny Sexton the closest to Jordan?
I don't know why. I just thought in my head that I actually hadn't heard Jordy Murphy last night, and I was like, all right, he's obviously going to pick Sexton now. I was just a bit surprised that Sexton wasn't the one that came out, just because of his level of standards, his clear on-pitch grumpiness sometimes, and hugely demanding of his players has been part of Ireland going to a whole new level. But then again, Paul O'Connell was instrumental in Ireland going to a whole new level for the first time, really, in the early part of the century. So perhaps because of the fact that his personality in his post-rugby playing life, and even during his rugby playing life, seems like a nice guy. He seems affable, perhaps, at times. Maybe we don't always associate Paul O'Connell with the fear of God aspect to his career. Whereas with Johnny Sexton, I think he's just a bit more serious in his day-to-day life. And for that reason, for me, you could compare him a little bit quicker to Jordan.
I'd be interesting to see what Johnny Sexton has made of the Jordan documentary. Who's nodding along. Yeah, exactly. Come on, everybody. Get it together. Or is it like, ooh... Anyway, look, let's move on because we do want to talk a little bit more about some rugby today. Neil Francis has an interesting piece in the Irish Independent where he's talking about David Nucifora and the relationship that Nucifora has with the provinces in the aftermath of the movement that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. In particular, Leinster are losing a couple of props, and one in particular who's obviously somebody that they've invested a lot of time and energy and effort in bringing over to this part of the world and seeing him develop. And as soon as he gets to the level where you're like, okay, this might be a player who makes an impact over the next season or two, Sadano is heading off to Munster. And the headline is sooner or later a call from Nucifora will cause conflict. I suspect there's already been conflict in the provinces with the national team, and there's always going to be this tension, right?
You would have thought so. Like the point that Neil Francis is making this morning is that Leinster might actually be short, which is not something we've associated with the province in recent times whatsoever. It's with the tight heads that are at their disposal, with Salanoa now going to Munster. It takes away one of the options that they thought they would have had 6, but actually that may dwindle. And he makes the point that Lou said you could have an aging Cian Healy, and Andrew Porter may actually shift across because he might get more test appearances at that position with Tadhg Furlong still around for a few years. So that leaves him a little bit empty at the other side of the scrum. He's making a point that he goes off with the Leinster playbook in his back pocket. And you would imagine that people involved in Leinster aren't too happy with this at all, given the investment that they've put into a lot of young players. And you would probably make the point, I'd imagine, I don't want to put words into your mouth, that there is almost a punishment for the success of the academy and the success of the conveyor belt that they've got going on in the province.
Well, if this continues to happen, why do you invest time and energy and effort into it? What's the point of that? Is there not a moral hazard at some point where you're like, okay, I'm going to develop all these players and it's my job to do it, and we might get a third of them through, even though we want all of them to come through?
You don't want to be putting across this idea that Leinster will bring through, 20 players, and out of those 20 players, the best 7 or 8 will become starters down through the years in a variety of positions, and then the remaining 13 or so will then get scattered across the rest of the provinces. It doesn't look good, in fairness. It isn't something that represents Irish rugby well as a whole. It's just the way the cards are stacked at the moment. There is just an unbelievable depth of options throughout the schools game in Leinster, throughout the resources that are available at Leinster, that this is the way it is always going to be. And like I think Francis makes this point as well, that Nucifora got a brand new contract. He looked like he was doing really, really well when Joe Schmidt was doing really, really well. And perhaps if things start to take a little bit of a downturn for a while, perhaps Ireland come back to a base level, as some people would put it, over the next few years. Perhaps then we'll start to look into a little bit more how well or how poorly Nucifora is performing. And that's going to be an interesting question, especially because he didn't really take much of the blame after the disaster of the Rugby World Cup last year. So
he certainly didn't accept any of the blame, and he did say that when he was asked, who is reviewing your performance, he was like, "Oh, that's a good question." And I'm paraphrasing there just for the sake of accuracy. So it is interesting that his success or failure is not something that we know how it's judged. We don't know how the IRFU regards his performance. He set the team needs to reach a semi-final for the World Cup to be successful. That was spoken about, and he essentially set that mark, and I think everybody accepts that is the mark. But if you're in charge of the team reaching the semi-final, essentially, you pick the coach, you understand which players get contracts, which provinces they play for. Maybe you didn't pick the coach, per se, but certainly the coach seemed to be reporting to him, and he was on the pitch with the coach in coaching gear. Like, what is the specifics of the role, I suspect, is the question that we don't really know the answer to, and how is that judged a success or failure?
True. Like, if you're in Nusafora's position and your role is for the general benefit of Irish rugby, and that is marked by the test team doing well, you are going to be making similar decisions. If you see that there is a talented prop who is sixth choice for their province, and you see that another province in Ireland is perhaps struggling at that position, or that young, promising player might actually get more of an opportunity there, you might actually shuffle the deck to do it. You can see why Nusafora makes these decisions. Also, as well, let's face it, despite these decisions being made, there is still a distance between Leinster and the other three provinces. Who are we to say that we're not at peak player movement? Like, who's to say that, like, this is not, that the floodgates aren't opening? Like, maybe the floodgates are currently open. Like, I know you want to kind of put forward the idea that everybody will be up for grabs that comes through the Leinster school system, and people will start being divvied up. The best player will always go on to play for Leinster if they're produced through the Leinster Academy. Like, there is still a situation here where if a player moves between the provinces, they are not first choice for Leinster.
But hang on.
Because of that, Leinster will always have their number one position as the province in Ireland.
You don't know that the 23-year-old prop isn't going to be the best prop at 26. Like, you probably want to keep that guy around to see what the level of evolution and development for that individual is, particularly a prop, right? And at out half, right? Clearly, at prop and out half, you want to give players time to mature. Everybody else, you kind of have a fair idea. I see the markers here. I see the career progression. I have a fair idea where they're going to go. But at these two positions, I actually, it was really fascinating to hear Brian O'Driscoll recently talking about being, I wasn't a member of the Leinster Academy, I was a member of the National Academy. James Collin, likewise, on Sunday, speaking with Neil Tracy a couple of Sundays back, spoke about being a member of the National Academy at underage level. And I wonder if actually the future here is not to have a Leinster, Munster, Ulster and Connacht Academy, but to continue to have the same amount of investment in those players, and actually they all have national contracts at that point. I don't know, I wonder if there's some way of doing that so that you actually remove the sense that you're building players just for this club. Because ultimately, if you're not, then everybody should know that from the start. And at that point, the freedom of movement becomes something that graduating class graduates at 19, 20, 21, or whatever it is. And you move up a year or you don't, you move up another year or you don't. Or they figure that, like, there's a dearth somewhere and you get moved around. And then it becomes a very natural thing to move. Now it's like you bring people up in a culture and you flip them to a different culture and expect them to thrive, and generally maybe they do. But like, why would I continue to build resources for my rivals? That's the issue.
Well, you're building resources for yourself as well. Let's not forget. You are going to reap the benefits of your own academy. Like, you will still get the cream of the crop as you see it at the age of 21 to 23. I accept your point that you can't tell how good a player is going to be in many positions, even at the age of 23. But you can make a good guess. You can employ the best coaches in the world to help you make that guess. You've got Stuart Lancaster, you've got Leo Cullen to go to the training park and make that guess for you, to actually look at which of these kids would you like to have? Which of these kids would you like to have if you could have 20 players in a position? But we're in Ireland, this is the situation. It's not ideal, of course it's not, but the cards are stacked in your favour. You can pick your hand. You can pick pocket aces, Leinster. You can give the pocket tens to Munster. Maybe a couple of more tens will throw up when the cards in the middle of the table are turned up, but you don't know what's going to happen down the line. You can give yourself the best opportunity to have the best team. You still have the odds stacked in your favour as Leinster. I agree, it's not an ideal situation. And the National Academy, I think that's actually a really good idea, because that way, you're getting people ready to hopefully put on the green jersey one day. That's a definite. Whereas in the Leinster Academy, you're not necessarily creating players to put on the blue jersey, because that might never happen. So I think that that's a good idea. But I still think in the current situation, it does seem a bit rich that that people are complaining about what other players might be doing when they go to other provinces. It's not ideal that those other provinces aren't as amazingly stacked as Leinster, but that isn't going to change for a whole range of reasons for the time being.
Well, look, I guess the question is, are the provinces doing enough? on their own, and is the IRFU doing enough to help the provinces to reach a level where they're able to become self-sustaining? Sure, there's always going to be a bottleneck and there are going to be too many players in one position, and at that point natural selection should out. But it seems like we haven't reached the natural selection just yet here, where this player wanted to leave because he wasn't getting game time. It seemed like Jordy Murphy wanted to leave because he wasn't getting game time and he wanted to play in the World Cup, so away you go. Likewise with Jack McGrath. Totally natural where they've reached that stage of their career. But when it's players who you haven't seen the potential for just yet, you kind of throw your hat at it and go, like, you know, Man United are not developing players from Manchester City. They just aren't. And if the competition between the provinces is not real, what's the point of watching the provinces?
For Joey Carberry and Johnny Sexton going toe-to-toe, Sexton pulling Carberry by the shirt, that seemed like a pretty real rivalry. Like,
in that one instance, these two players were battling for the same position after a player has moved. Did he want to move? You know, like the Johnny Sexton Ronan O'Gara rivalry, they became friends later on. Like, I don't know the point of that. I guess I'm saying Man United and Man City are not swapping academy players who are going to go on and represent each other, because there's a real proper rivalry between these two. It turns out the provinces are like brothers in arms who are all trying to, you know, essentially win for Ireland together. For me, it just diminishes those matches and the intensity of those matches. And we're about to enter a period where we're going to have to watch a lot of those games going, that guy used to play for that team and that guy used to play for that team. And actually, they're all really from the same area. But sense of identity and place is hugely important to these other two teams, even though half that team is actually from Dublin.
Well, the Manchester City-Manchester United comparison, they're not being brought up to represent Ireland in the final place or to represent a single country. They don't have a union over their head that has their own interests. And you can't just ignore, like, Nusafora isn't going in here saying, what is the worst job I can possibly do? You can see what he is trying to achieve with all of this. We gave him credit, and he deserves a lot of credit for, I think, the way Joe Schmidt was stacked, at least going into that Grand Slam year of 2018. Like a vast array of options as a result of how pawns have been moved around the provinces. Your point, of course, there was truth in the fact that perhaps, it's not a perhaps, it's a definite that the provincial game won't thrive as a result of this process. But I still think you can have an excellent rivalry that exists between these provinces. You can't have a brilliant situation in every aspect of the game. You can try and strive for an outstanding international team, which is clearly the number one priority here. And in the meantime, try not to mess up the rivalry between the provinces too much. In my opinion, they haven't done that whatsoever. I think there's been some great battles between Leinster and Munster in particular over recent years. I think as long as fans are there to support their teams, and there will always be Munster fans, and there will always be Leinster fans, and there will always be a rivalry.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that this kind of stuff just chips away at it. I don't have the solution straight off the bat, but I think it's definitely worth considering. The one other thing is, like, the point of Neil Francis's piece is that anybody with a foreign accent comes along and tells us what to do, and we're all lemmings and we go for it. That, like, essentially, he has an anecdote about Gary Ella being the Leinster coach and talking about changing the Leinster Schools Rugby coach. Leinster Schools Rugby Club. The one thing you would ask is whether or not Australian rugby is exactly where we should be looking for guidance, or even New Zealand rugby at the moment. Like, we need our own rugby culture, and we need to know exactly what that rugby culture is and to define that, because we can't keep looking outside all the time. Look outside for ideas. Look outside for new coaching trends and analysis. But, like, what do we stand for ourselves? At some point, you need to stand up and have your own identity. If you look at the success of the Dublin footballers, if you look at the success of Kilkenny, they've taken stuff from everywhere else, but they've built it on their own principles. This is who we are. We're Cork, right? Like, when Cork were good, they had an innate Corkness. Over the last while, they've kind of gone away from that. What does Irish rugby stand for? What is our identity? What is Leinster's identity? Very clear, I would say. And absolutely, they needed some foreign coaching to help them get off that. But it wasn't that, like, they took something just from Randwick and said, we're going to go with this. It was the best of what Leinster had to offer with a little bit mixed in. we're going to do a full hour on Australian rugby between 9 and 10 this morning, so maybe we shouldn't labour this anymore. But if you've got one last point there on you wanted to get in on, go for it.
No, you made the point there as well. Like, it's just important to point out how you can use foreign coaching in such an unbelievably beneficial way.
100%.
And I know that's that point you're making at all.
Exactly.
But it's like you look at Stuart Lancaster, you look at Pat Lam. Like, if there is a better stencil.
Pat Lam's a great example. Pat Lam came in and said, "What makes Connacht Connacht? I'm going to build on that, and I'm going to bring you my philosophy, and then we're going to share that collectively, and everybody's going to have to buy into it." And you hope that what's happening here is that the erosion of the values which make Munster Munster and Leinster Leinster aren't happening to the point where it doesn't actually matter where you're from. Because that's the one thing that Irish rugby has that other rugby countries don't have, that make the provinces good. And the provinces have been really good. And I understand that the national team is where you make all your money, right? And the provinces probably couldn't survive if they didn't have the injection of cash. But the thing that makes the national team good is that the provinces are good, and that they're strong, and they have a sense of identity, and that rivalry is completely real between those two provinces. When you erode that, you risk... It is a pyramid, and you're taking away the foundations of that pyramid, and it could collapse. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm sure that they'll be able to fix it, and if this policy doesn't work in 5 years' time, it won't be too late to go back. But in the meantime, I can't imagine what it must be like to work in the Leinster Academy, put hours and hours and hours into an individual who then gets good and gets whipped away from you, and you're like, what? Like, what's the point of that?
Well, it must be pretty good to work there when you put hours and hours and hours into an individual, and the best ones actually go on to lift the Champions Cup for Leinster. Because that happens quite a bit.
Right. Let's move on. 21 minutes past 8 here this morning. Coming up, I'll give you the sports bulletin first. The IOC President Thomas Bach says he fully understands why the Tokyo Games would have to be scrapped if the event can't be held next year due to the crisis. Games are obviously pushed back a year in March. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said that the event cannot take place in 2021 unless the virus is contained. In an interview with the BBC, Bach said he understood the view of the Japanese government, but he also said the IOC were committed to holding the Games next year. They have to be prepared for various scenarios, including athletes going into quarantine. In football, the League of Ireland clubs could find out about a potential return date later on when the FAI steering group meets again. Thomond Park could be used as a venue for games when the season resumes. The Aviva Stadium and Athlone are also in line to stage games, while FAI headquarters in Abbottstown has been earmarked for First Division matches. FAI Medical Director Dr Alan Byrne says games can only take place when there is an acceptable level of risk. Premier League matches could be televised free to air following productive discussions between the government and football's authorities. Sky and BT obviously hold the rights to screen the remaining top 5 fixtures this season, but with matches set to resume behind closed doors, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden believes ending the 3 p.m. Saturday blackout gives them room to negotiate. Meanwhile, Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp is optimistic the Premier League will be able to resume next month after a squad returned to training in small groups yesterday for the first time since football was postponed in March. Amateur boxing in Ireland is facing a massive crisis after 2 clubs were made homeless in the last 48 hours. St Teresa's and Bray say the premises that they'd been using was sold without them being informed, and Tullow and Carlow have also been left seeking a new home after a rent freeze was denied. Here's what's coming up for you. We're going to speak with Mary O'Connor from the Federation of Irish Sport around about 8:35 this morning. They've made a call for a resilience fund to help clubs like the boxing club in Tullow and Carlow and like St Teresa's and Bray. These are obviously very important aspects of social architecture that kind of bond society together, and so they're asking for a bit of help for that. And Michael Cheika and Andrew Mehrtens are the guests this week on Keith Wood's State of the Union, which is coming your way after 9 o'clock. So at 8:23 we'll bring you the papers.
OTB AM.
Offtheball.com, a national scandal, the Bradford fire, 35 years on. Daniel Taylor was on last night talking about the Bradford fire, which is just one of those horrific tragedies in English football, with a lot of very unanswered questions, still very relevant 35 years on for the families of that. And the worst feeling I've ever had, Jordy Murphy talked about his World Cup dropping. Danny Rose on mental health and how managers can make a difference. Amateur boxing facing crisis. 2 clubs in 24 hours homeless, and tributes paid as ex-WWE star Shad Gaspard dies trying to save son. A terrible story from the last week, where his son was essentially rescued by Coast Guards just at the very last second. A riptide came along and carried Shad Gaspard away, and they discovered his body yesterday. So that's what's on offtheball.com for you this morning if you want to get your sports fix.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with a picture there of Jurgen Klopp back at the Liverpool training ground. It's like the first day of school, he says. Reddit's boss says squad is in good spirits as Watford star shocked by positive test. That is Adrian Mariapia, who was fairly surprised, I think, to say the least, when he got his positive test for coronavirus. Also, sports data company to examine GAA contact time. So this is the Newry-based company behind the player proximity white paper that provides detail of contact between Premier League players ahead of a return to training this week. Hopes to soon be in a position to provide similar information to GAA clients. So this is Stat Sports, and they've been showing data for Premier League clubs where players are in the personal space of other players for a percentage of time that is actually less than people expected. And crucially, it is less than health experts advise is required for COVID-19 to be passed from person to person. They don't claim for it to be an exact science. They're just saying it's a guideline, but it's very interesting. And of course, there is the fact here that the GEA and the way Gaelic games is played, there is far more man marking. There is far more possibility for people to be within the personal space of another player for far longer than in football. So it's interesting, and it's a Newry-based company involved in all of this from the Premier League's point of view.
The Irish Times, their lead is Autumn Six Nations could cap busy 7-test Irish schedule. So this is the return to play August 22nd, Leinster-Munster at the Aviva. Could herald a hectic spell of games, and they've got a list here. This is Gavin Comiskey's story. Leinster-Munster on August 21st, Ulster-Connacht on the 23rd, and then Interpros the next week, Leinster-Ulster, and then they're looking at a Pro 14 final on the 17th of September, followed by Champions Cup semi-finals, and then the 3rd of October, Ireland-Italy, and Pro 14 starts again, and then France-Ireland the following week, Champions Cup final the week after that, and then hopefully a Six Nations in October, November and December, which will be pretty exciting. I think we would all be very excited about the fact that you'll have a lot of rugby between the end of August and Christmas, if it can happen. Dave Hannigan's got an interesting column today, How a Hoodlum and Murderer Gained Control of Boxing. Just better read you the first paragraph of this. The Tsar of Boxing did not have an office. Frankie Carbo preferred to conduct business at his favourite table in the Garden Cafeteria just across 8th Avenue from Madison Square Garden. Promoters, managers, trainers and fighters made daily pilgrimage there to genuflect before this grey-haired, mild-mannered gentleman as he sipped his coffee. And then he goes on to tell you about Carbo potentially being the trigger man who offered Bugsy Siegel as he sat on a couch in a... Sorry, the word is oft, not offered. So, you know Bugsy Siegel from the movie, and Carbo is the guy who was suspected to be his murderer, and obviously goes on to become a very important person, a senior figure in global boxing. And then obviously Munster then unlikely to recruit a replacement for Tyler Blandall is the other story there. The terrible news yesterday that Tyler Blandall had to retire.
The London Times this morning leads with the story about Watford. Worried stars stay away, they say, as Watford train. So several members of Watford's squad have refused to attend the club's first training session because of the safety fears ahead of the Premier League's planned restart next season. They lead with a photograph of Mo Salah back in training for Liverpool. They've got a constant stream of information on whether or not saliva will be used on balls or not in cricket on the back of the Times. And this morning's headline is Saliva Ban Will Hurt Spinners. Meanwhile, air Saturday games for free is a quote, which is the headline of Matt Lawton's piece. The government increasing pressure on the Premier League to make some matches free to air, possibly on Saturday afternoons. So it could be potentially on Sky Sports or BT's YouTube channel, for example.
The Irish Examiner, Klopp, players who don't feel safe, free not to train. And then picture Tyler Blandall, a tough decision, but the right decision. Blandall bows out. This is a significant neck injury that he's had over the last while. And they also have comments from Ronan O'Gara saying he's unbelievably well respected in New Zealand, and at 29 he is a coach in waiting. So he may immediately join the Munster coaching ticket. The Irish Times are reporting that they won't be replacing him just yet, that they have a couple of young kids coming up who are very good out halves at the age of 20 who we might get to see some game time for in the next while.
The Irish Mirror this morning, How did this happen? Is the headline on the Mariappa story. He says, I don't party, I rarely go out, just go for a walk with the kids. Ever since I got the result, I've been scratching my head. Ulster Ace Murphy, meanwhile, is backing a restart at the Aviva. This is Jordy Murphy, who, of course, was on the show last night, who's backing plans to return to competitive action in behind closed doors games at the Aviva Stadium. And new kid on the cop is Jurgen Klopp, and the headline of that story, because he said yesterday felt like his first day back at school.
The Irish Sun, back page there, is Barry is secret Swindon backer. He lent agent pal who bought club shares 800 grand. And then the other one here is the subheadline, Waterford under power an 800 grand loan claim. So this is a Gareth Barry somehow involved in helping to bail out Swindon, which is apparently against FA rules. So I'm sure you'll hear more about that story. Our balls are sticky is the headline. The Premier League's big return to training has been hampered by sticky balls. It's football zone. Get your mind out of the gutter. Some players have angrily slammed the Phase 1 COVID-19 training programmes as pointless and ludicrous. All 20 top flight clubs have now resumed work, but the disinfectant that is being sprayed on the balls has reacted to the hot weather, causing the surface to become tacky and affecting movement. Don't spray your balls with disinfectant.
Good for goalkeepers, sticky balls.
Yeah.
Back page of the Irish Daily Star is Why Me? Watford ace Mariappa baffled by coronavirus positive test. It's a touch of class for Klopp, who's back in school, as I've mentioned. Player grief, a real issue, meanwhile. This is Paul Keane writing that leading performance psychologist Tony O'Gregan says the current COVID-19 shutdown has plunged some players into grief. He talks about the association, the deep association between footballers and hurlers and their sport. They see themselves as hurlers, they see themselves as footballers, and to have that taken away for a prolonged period of time obviously causes a whole range of mental health issues. And also Charlton to swoop for Troy. Charlton will renew their interest in teenage Ireland striker Troy Parrott next season.
The Telegraph next. Back page of the Telegraph there is Mariappa with shock at positive test. We've just done that story. Plea to save British Grand Prix by easing quarantine, which is, it seems to me, the exact same story as yesterday, but no, it says Thursday the 21st of May on that one. ITV presents 1.5 million bill for lost national. Hotel isolation plan requires law change. So all those plans are still being worked on. And Serge Aurier got his haircut. Not supposed to get your haircut. Faces a significant fine for that.
The Guardian this morning leads with a photograph of Mo Salah back in training. Look who's back. Salah and Liverpool squad return to training before possible restart. Staying at home, several Watford players missed training amid COVID-19 fears. That is the headline on the latest news from Watford and the Premier League. And Formula 1 plans 8 European races to start season.
And the what's next for me is the Herald. The Herald this morning is essentially that story that Colin Keys had about Stat Sports and how the GA are going to be able to use some of the data from some of the teams who use Stat Sports to get at least a sense of how often players are in contact with each other during training and matches. And Jur first day back at school, Liverpool boss puts on his uniform again for training.
The Irish news finally from me. Belfast and Glasgow Celtic link offers new pathway to paradise. That's a story on both of the Celtic teams there. And Coney says counties must wait their turn after resumption. That's Kyle Coney saying club football must come first in the return to play in Gaelic games.
The last one is the Mail, and it's Kante opts out. So this is Chelsea star won't train due to virus fears. Chelsea star N'Golo Kante opted out of Phase 1 training yesterday due to his concerns. There's a picture of Mo Salah back at training. And Blayandal poised for a move into coaching. You'd hope that he'd be able to stick around. Munster head coach Johan van Graan has confirmed he is looking to add another coach to his backroom team, and Blayandal could be a prime candidate to fill that vacant role. Obviously, you never really want to see anybody end their career like this, but given the severity of the injuries, it seems like it was the right time for him to call time on that. So let's move on, because it's 34 minutes past 8 this morning, and Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, are marking the 10-year anniversary of the official opening of the Aviva Stadium and its proud long-term sponsorship of the iconic venue. To celebrate this milestone, Aviva are paying tribute to some of the most iconic sporting memories of the past decade. You can join in yourself. You can follow Aviva Ireland on Instagram and Twitter and share your favourite Aviva Stadium memories using the hashtag #SafeToDream. Now, the people of Sligo mobilised yesterday. I think League of Ireland fans mobilised yesterday, and we had a bit of a surprise, but not really that much of a shock. A bit of a surprise. Kieran Kelly, who saved 4 penalties in a row. We spoke to him about all 4 of them on the show about 24 hours ago. And Shane Long's goal against Germany is out. Kevin Kilban reckoned that Shane Long's goal against Germany was one of the biggest goals in the history of Irish football, and it has been beaten by 4 successive penalties being saved by the Sligo Rovers goalkeeper a decade ago, which is, in fairness, a fairly amazing thing. But certainly the good people of Sligo and I think the League of Ireland fans were out in force. The second semi-final is live right now. This is pinned on our Twitter account. It's Jonathan Walters against Bosnia, against Shawnee Maguire against Dundalk. So could we have an all League of Ireland final? We could. If the League of Ireland fans get out now and start voting for Shawnee Maguire against Dundalk, it'll be Shawnee Maguire versus Kieran Kelly. But I would suspect that nothing's going to stop Kieran Kelly. The Sligo Rovers juggernaut is on the road and it's in convoy, and they're not stopping until they get to the Aviva.
No, once a momentum starts in social media, it is hard to derail it. And like you said, momentum doesn't matter, Ger. Look at these polls and read it and weep. It is a real thing. The scientists who sat down and said, this is the formula for momentum, will be looking at the Kieran Kelly polls and saying, proof.
Right, we're going to talk the future of Irish sport with Mary O'Connor of the Federation of Irish Sport next on this morning's OTB AM. First, though, let's hear from Lawrence Donegan. Here he is talking with Joe last night about Rory McIlroy and Donald Trump. Have a listen.
That was quite funny. Yeah, it was quite surreal. We were watching the Skins game on Sunday, and Mike Tirico, the host for NBC, asked Trump a question that he didn't actually mention the podcast, but a question derived from Rory's appearance on the podcast. What was quite interesting to me was that Trump skirted the opportunity to have a go at Rory. And that, because there's a pal of mine who works at a newspaper in New York, and he's known Trump for years, and we were chatting. And I said to him, do you think Trump will tweet out at Rory? And he said, there's no chance he will do that because he's such a jock sniffer, which means a kind of sports fan. That's an American term for sports fan. He will not want to fall out with Rory. And lo and behold, he very skillfully dodged the chance to have a go back at Rory in the midst of making what was essentially a party political broadcast in the middle of the whole thing. So there you go. That was a little bit of insight into the mind of Donald Trump.
Yeah, you can get that full interview available for download wherever you get your podcasts. The best place is the Go Loud app or indeed offtheball.com/podcast. Now, the Federation of Irish Sport has called for a resilience fund to help Irish sport get through this very difficult period. The Federation of Irish Sport are the umbrella group for national governing bodies, and they are the voice of Irish sport. And I'm delighted to say Mary O'Connor, the CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport, is with us this morning. Mary, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with there's a couple of things that we want to talk about. One is this call for a resilience fund. What would the fund do and how would it work?
The resilience fund is necessary. National governing bodies and local clubs all over the country are facing a huge challenge. Since there's an unprecedented halt in sporting activity, they have no way of generating income which they normally would, which would be subscriptions, and obviously activity, gate receipts, event activity, and the hosting of summer camps and coaching courses. So we need a resilience fund to help them remain viable.
How would it be administered? Who would pay for it? How much do you need?
That's a really good question regarding the figure. The longer this goes on, it's so uncertain, it's very difficult to actually put a figure on it. Obviously, we're looking for a government solution on this, and I've been proactively working with the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport and Sport Ireland to try and see where can finance be found and also how it can be administered to the national governing bodies of sport, but also to the local clubs as well.
Because, look, we saw just yesterday a couple of boxing clubs who are saying they're now essentially homeless. One because the building was sold out from underneath them, and the other one because they're not getting a rent freeze. That's just an example of what we're going to see from lots of clubs right around the country. Any club that doesn't actually own its own pitch, that's renting, and you know they're not going to have, as you said, the ability to raise funds. So, how are similar schemes like this in existence around the world? Are there practical ways that we can actually address this and learn from other jurisdictions?
Yeah, look, obviously, you know, what's happened to Bray and Tullow is really unfortunate, but unfortunately it's something that possibly we're going to see more of. If clubs can't generate income, obviously they're going to struggle to survive, as well as Bray and Tullow did. Sport New Zealand have activated a resilience fund, as have Sport England, Sport Wales and Sport Northern Ireland as well. So there is international examples of how this is being rolled out. Sport New Zealand have activated 147 million bailout for resilience fund, and I think that resilience fund is really important because it gives people some type of security. What we want to try and do is to make sure the sport remains viable, that it can adapt and become stronger, because we're going to be living with COVID-19 for a long time.
I think in instances like this, it's always no harm to explain why sport matters. We all have a kind of general sense of it being important as a health policy, an education policy, a social policy, whatever, but actually affirming why these sports clubs are very important at a local community level, and why, given all of the other drain and resources that the state coffers have, at this moment we should siphon off a certain amount for sports clubs.
Yeah, look, absolutely. People would see sport as being great for physical and emotional well-being, and that's absolutely correct. You know, especially in rural areas, the local sports club is your focus point. It's possibly where, you know, due to closing down, you know, public houses and so on, it's where your focal point is. I think the important to understand is that sport exists in this country in many guises, and what we can't take for granted is that expectation that that'll be the same way as COVID-19 goes on. Sport has also a huge economic value. It accounts for 2.7 billion in annual consumer spending on the island of Ireland every year. It employs 40,000 people in the job sector. So it has a huge economic value as well. And a lot of time people don't see that. And it has an economic value not just at national level, but local level as well. And the one thing we're saying about the Resilience Fund is people will apply for funding from the Resilience Fund based on need. There have to be an evidence of need. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand. And national governing bodies, for the most part, are not-for-profit organisations who exist to organise sport across the island of Ireland. And if 13,000 clubs that feed into our national sporting organisations are under pressure, then as a consequence of that, the national governing bodies will also be under pressure, and sport will struggle to remain viable, not just at a national level, but really at a local level.
Mary, how much do you see sport returning to its viability over the next 2-3 months as we go through the phases of the government's roadmap? Do you see anything in that gives you hope?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the likes of tennis and golf have a huge responsibility on them, and they're taking really seriously the protocols that they put in place for return to sport. So we have to be very careful with that. But, I mean, obviously sport was one of the first sectors to adhere to the government guidelines. There was a complete halt activity, and sport respects and obviously endorses the emergency health team's directions. But it's going to take time, and obviously I'm a sports fan like all of you, and we'd like to see sport back, but we have to be sure and cognizant of the fact that people have lost their lives to this awful disease, and we have to take our time and be sure that it is safe for all participants to go back to. And I think you all can't underestimate the psychological work that needs to be done, especially for kids and for parents, maybe, to ensure that they realise that it is safe for their child to go back to participating in sport and physical activity, whatever the sport was.
How should that be managed? You've called for the introduction of a task force as well. It feels like there certainly should be some kind of cross-industry body who's saying, look, this is what we've learned, this is best practice from around the world, this is the latest research. Because, again, as was the case at the very start of the crisis, people are getting information. Children are no longer super spreaders. Actually, they're less likely to spread the disease. And then all of a sudden, there's the emergence of a new respiratory illness, which seems to be specifically targeting children. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, don't worry about that. It's only been 3 cases. Like, the information that's coming through, depending on what your sources is either very positive or kind of a little bit still concerning. So how do clubs and the government and the Federation of Irish Sport and sponsors and broadcasters all come together to kind of say, well, look, what is our official nationally agreed pathway here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Federation welcomed the Return to Sport expert group that has been established. And I'm sure that expert group, when they're coming up with the views on return to sport, you can't underestimate the cost that implies for local clubs and organisations as well. to put in infrastructure, things like hand sanitizers, signage, also the training of volunteers, risk assessments at local level. And you're talking about local level sports, talking about volunteers, and that's a huge responsibility for them. You take that into thinking, but also the task force that we're looking for. We wanted to sit alongside the Resilience Fund. We want the Resilience Fund to come, and obviously because it's urgent, it's needed. Some of the national government bodies are really feeling the financial pressures at the moment. And the task force, we want innovative thinking, we want swift action, we want to learn from international best practice. And I think you're right, there needs to be that communality that exists in sport anyway, across the whole sector, to ensure that when sport does come back, that obviously people feel happy, safe, and secure that they can enjoy their sport in a safe manner as they did previously.
Whose job is it to set up that task force? Is it a government? I mean, does this now need political support, A, to give you the money, and B, to set up a task force and give it some teeth?
Yeah, look, obviously we need a government solution to this, and the Federation of Irish Sport have submitted documentation to Ministers Griffin and Minister Ross on this, and we're waiting on a reply from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. But I must say that we have worked quite closely with Sport Ireland, the Department and Minister Griffin on this topic for a number of weeks now, and we've had a number of meetings. So they know the reality and they're aware of the situation that's going on. And obviously the tourism working group was announced yesterday. But the most important thing for the sport right now is we need a resilience fund to assist sport to remain viable, because it will cost the government an awful lot more money to restart sport post-COVID-19. We need to make sure that sport remains viable now.
Mary, it's interesting that you mentioned the tourism sector had been looked after there over the last couple of days. It was certainly one of the talking points that we had during the general election, especially about how sport is governed on a political level. After the general election, is there the possibility of sport being in a different department, allied with different things that aren't transport and tourism? Does this opportunity now, where there is no sport happening, give you the chance to have a think, and other power brokers in our sport to have a think about how sport is run politically and how we might proceed in the future, that things are better for sport? I'm not saying that things are run badly whatsoever, but just to improve things on an overall level going forward.
Yeah, the Federation of Irish Sport, coming to the general election, we obviously submitted our thoughts on sport in a manifesto to all the parties going for election, and that's one thing we put in to look in taking tourism and sport away from the transport department, simply because the department, it's a massive department. Obviously, transport is huge in this country. We wanted to have own ministerial positions for tourism and sport, and maybe the opportunity is there now to redraw the lines with the new government formations. And we'd certainly, endorse that. Tourism is a huge sector economically to Ireland, but also if you look at sports tourism, it's worth at least 500 million annually to Ireland, and that's without hosting any big international sporting events such as international rugby matches, soccer matches, or golf tournaments.
Mary, I did want to just bring up one last thing before we go, and that was obviously this year was supposed to be the culmination of the campaign for 20 by 20. Obviously, it was not supposed to be the end. It was supposed to be the start of something different, but the campaign was called 20 by 20, and all those targets were put in for this year. Have you any sense yet of what's going to happen with the campaign? Do you make sure that it goes into 2021 now, given that it will essentially be 2021 before some sense of normality returns to the coverage of sport?
Yeah, look, obviously from a Federation of Irish Sport point of view and from a 2020 movement point of view, the commitment was to October of 2020, and that's the goal we're working towards. Obviously, the work of the campaign has been stymied now due to COVID-19, but we're still working hard. There's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes. And obviously then we have the 20 by 20 movement still interacting and still motivating people to be physically active during COVID-19, because that's what we wanted the campaign to be. We wanted to resonate not just with people who already participate in sport, but also people who might think about getting back into sport or actually participate in sport for the first time. So it's a kind of a campaign that has had real success, and we've been blown away by the success it's had, and we want to try and continue on to that, but obviously we're aiming for an October finish currently.
All right, Mary, we'll leave it there. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
It's Mary O'Connor there, the Chief Executive of the Federation of Irish Sport, talking about the need for a resilience fund to help a lot of clubs who are in difficulty just see this period out so that they're still standing when we come out the other side. And I think that's definitely going to be a focus of a lot of conversations, is what can we save and how much money do we have to be able to allocate to save different things. And every industry is obviously lobbying very hard at the moment to try and make a special case and an exceptional case. I think this is an opportunity for us all to reflect on just how important sports clubs are going to be in getting people out, getting people active from a mental health perspective, from a wellness perspective, from a fitness, from a health. Notwithstanding the fact that we all want to go and see games, if people can go back training, if people can go back and be socially distant while at the same time being together, then you can see the benefits that that's going to have for our society straight away and right into the future as well. So if you've got any thoughts on that, 087 9180 180 is the number that you can get us on by WhatsApp, or of course you can always tweet the show at Off the Ball. Now, coming next, we have this here. Yeah, so sorry about that. One more thing we did want to bring your way this morning is the story of Ballinamore Sean O'Heslin's GAA club in Leitrim. There's a piece up around the club on offtheball.com which you can read now. The club has 69 female members, which is more than a quarter of the club's total membership. And the ladies' side of things has only been in existence since 2003. They've moved up through the ranks of junior football into intermediate, and for 2020 they've qualified for senior. You can read all about the club and how they're growing the ladies' side of the operation on offtheball.com. Have a look at this.
My favourite thing about playing Gaelic football is it keeps me fit and healthy while working hard on a team with my friends.
My greatest highlight to date was reversing our earlier defeat to our great rivals to win the Shield final in 2019.
I joined O'Shaughnessy Ladies in 2007, a relatively new club that was founded in 2003.
Our under-9, under-11 teams are made up of 60% from girl players. As part of our club philosophy to make sure that those girls can progress into the senior levels.
Jack Sports, exclusive distribution partner to Under Armour Team Sports, is excited to let Ballinamore Sean O'Heslin's club know that your €1,000 worth of kit will be ready for you when you get back up training and playing.
We're looking at a long layoff here and maybe no championship this year. If the only option was one behind closed doors, which will be the only option if there's going to be one, are you in favour of that? You're happy to go out and play championship games away from a crowd just to get it done for the players, for the, I guess, the simple pleasure of taking part and trying to win something, or is it not worth it without the fans?
I think it's very much, I'd find it very weird without it. If the gun is put to my head, I'd say no. I don't think it would be the same without the fans. I don't think we should run a championship just for the sake of running a championship or for ticking a box. And we know we all want it and we'd love a few matches. I think if there was a Junior B championship played off in the morning and it was streamed live, it would be the most viewed going because we're just craving games. But I think, personally, I couldn't see, we've all played challenge matches behind closed doors and there's just no atmosphere to it really, and you can hear everything that's going on. But I think that atmosphere draws it out a little bit more. I think as a player, I think that's what you want. You want to play in front of the big crowds. You want to play in front of the big stadiums. So that would definitely be weird. But look, if it's for the sake of, if it has to be, it has to be. There's no problem. I think once everybody gets the level playing field with that, I think that the one thing that you want is that if they announce what way it's going to roll, that everybody comes from the same base in terms of, it's a green light now to start doing collective training. But yeah, look, if I'm being asked black and white, I wouldn't really be in favour of that. I just couldn't imagine it being anything like what Championship hurling is about. I'm sure the players won't mind if you end up winning the Liam McCarthy or a Leinster or a Munster Championship. You may not be too fussed.
Yeah, it's funny. Eddie Brennan there, obviously talking as the current Laois manager, but as a former Kilkenny legend as well. And it's interesting that, going to his head, he's saying no, but actually doesn't really think the players will mind if they end up winning it. They'll still consider it. And I suspect that there won't be a gun to anybody's head first off, but that ultimately, if we can play some games, if you think about the pathway that Rugby have put out, where there'll be games from August, if you think about what the League of Ireland are going to announce today, where we'd expect games probably even before August or around that time, that by November there will be a country, assuming everything goes well and there isn't a second surge, which is a huge assumption to make, certainly the way the patterns are evolving at the moment, that by November time we'd all be like, maybe we could play some GAA. What do you think? Could we just have some games, even if it's just in like Croker and Porky Queeve, and it's just for some tournament? Let's have them.
I think definitely November. Even I know that is the official GAA line, that it's October at the very least. I think it's kind of like a pessimistic view. You can see why the GAA have said this, that they want to give themselves the best opportunity to actually be in a position to go forward from October or November time, and who knows what they might be able to do before that on a club level. But like, I certainly would be of the point of view that things that have been said in the papers in recent days and recent weeks, that it is harder to get things up and running safely at a grassroots level, is definitely true. The inter-county game would be an easier one to get up and running safely because, as you say, you'd have Páirc Uí Chaoimh or Croke Park available, and you'd have far more resources available to these teams as well. I think once we start to see rugby happening in August, and as you mentioned, the League of Ireland, but even now when you see a Bundesliga weekend go off without any huge or seismic hitches, and the Premier League next month, I think the Premier League is going to be key, because the Bundesliga can only take you so far in terms of having a conversation about sport and feeling that sport is back. But next month, come June 19th, when you've got Liverpool and Manchester United fans around the country talking about sport again, it won't feel as taboo a subject. And it feels to me at times that the GAA have approached this in a way that is, God, we can't go there. We can't possibly suggest that anybody go out onto a football pitch, which seemed very cautious. Definitely a safe thing to do, and you can't criticise anybody for being safe in this current climate. But I just wonder if the potential risk can be minimised, and the view of the GAA is that actually we can minimise this risk quite efficiently, and we might actually be able to do something maybe even a little bit sooner than later on in the autumn, because remember, Horn has said that we could move things forward as well. Like, I'd be optimistic on that front of having behind closed doors games at this point before the end of the season, especially in a month's time if the Premier League is up and running and things haven't gotten any worse.
Sorry, I had this on the desk earlier. I meant to draw attention to it. It's B.A. Baracus' birthday today. Mr. T is 68.
Well, a big happy birthday to Mr. T. 68.
Yeah.
68. Is that all?
Now you're making me doubt myself.
God, that's impressive. Like, we are...
68,
I suppose he is. Yeah, I suppose he is, in fairness. Yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason I thought he was a lot older. I don't know why I would think that, because he's clearly not.
Well, Rocky 3 was his breakout performance. It was pre the A team, and then obviously the A team comes next, and that was kind of it, really.
Well, it's true. You see, I when we watched that back recently, I was like, well, this is peak Mr. T, but actually it's not. It's the start of a beautiful career for him, really.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I distracted you there from the very salient point you were making about the GAA and their return to action. But we'll come back to that again some other time, because we've plenty of time. It turns out we've months and months to talk about when or what the GAA might look like when it comes back. So in the meantime, if you want to get involved, you can WhatsApp the show. 0879 180 180 is the number. Tomorrow, it's Wicklow's Mount Rushmore with Adrian and Eoin. Paul Howard and OTB's Tom Malone are putting their necks on the line. Darragh O'Brien is going to join us as well. Is this a good county? Is this straightforward? Do they have anybody? Bueller? Anybody?
I've got a feeling that they might have used up all their legends in broadcasting and writing and comedy with Darragh O'Brien, Tom Malone and Paul Howard. It's as star-studded a cast as we've had for a selection committee. No offence, Kildare, but it's as star-studded a cast as we've had for a selection committee.
I see Ronnie Delaney lived there for 3 or 4 years, so they're going to try and steal him. Obviously, Katie Taylor is like straight on. After that, is it like Kevin O'Brien? And is there anybody else? Eamon Darcy?
Mick O'Dwyer. Mick O'Dwyer are going to make it onto like 4 different Mount Rushmores by the time this thing is over. Katie Taylor, obviously, number one. Like, as we said, there's only a few counties that have absolute bankers. The conversation has already been had. She is up there. We're picking 3 heads, really, between the rest of the contenders.
Fionnuala McCormack, Gary O'Toole, Reggie Corrigan, Shane Byrne, Leo Cullen. Leo Cullen has a shout now.
It's
putting together a very, very, very impressive coaching career.
You would imagine he'll be in with a great shot of making it, actually, Leo Cullen. It's quite impressive in terms of rugby options. In terms of outside of Dublin, Leinster counties, you'd have to have Wicklow up there.
Kevin O'Brien, Ed Joyce, the cricketers.
Both contenders have to be contenders. We'll see. Like, is there any good racing heads there? that Tom Malone is going to
shoehorn in.
Put out, yeah.
Too many mountains. The grass isn't good. The horses don't like it. It's bang on 9 o'clock this morning. You've got plenty coming up for you in the next hour here on OTB AM. Keith Wood, Andrew Mehrtens and Michael Cheika join us for episode 3 of Keith Wood's State of the Union. That's next.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. Off the ball.
But when I got to Liverpool, I thought, right, I've bought myself a nice Aston Martin. I pulled up on the lights alongside Roy Keane, of all people, and I had the shades on. I think I was listening to some speed garage. My arm was out the window. I was having myself. And then Roy gave me that look that he's given many of people in his time. And as he sped off into the distance, I was sitting in this car, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, I need to get rid of this.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium. OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
All right, you're very welcome along to episode 3 of Keith Wood's State of the Union. We're looking at the Southern Hemisphere this week, and I'm delighted to say we've got Michael Cheika and Andrew Mehrtens with us. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome from your respective lockdowns. Keith, the Southern Hemisphere is something that we really need to concentrate on for this week, because we're very interested in the relationship between the Southern Hemisphere and the Northern Hemisphere, and particularly maybe some of the aspects of change that are coming in the Southern Hemisphere that maybe we should look at ourselves as well.
Yeah, I do. Look, I think some of the changes that have happened over the last 2 decades, some of them really worked, some of them haven't. And some of the tinkering that happens with really good competitions has ultimately impacted on them. And we've seen that, I think, in Super Rugby, when it was Super 10, Super 12, it was pretty phenomenal. But suddenly it became this geographical behemoth. It stretched everywhere. And there's an element of disconnect that happens within that. So, and for the boys' benefit, we've used this podcast just to try and have a little cursory glance over a proper reset for the game that COVID has given us, because there was change. Everybody was struggling. Everybody was under pressure for the last number of years. But there has never been a chance or an opportunity to stop and look and take stock of where we are. And we're looking at the game struggling very heavily. And in the last couple of weeks, even, the chance to try and get back to play has just caused more problems, more issues. The finances of all the countries, the clubs, the unions are all beginning to kind of struggle a little bit more. So I think everybody's nervous, and we're trying to have a little look globally, if we can, at what happened in Ireland, what happened in the UK, in France, in Europe, how much that impacts on the Southern Hemisphere teams, but also how much of an impact we are having on drawing so many of the players from the Southern Hemisphere, and whether that is being detrimental down there as well. So I think that's a snapshot of where our conversation is going.
Michael, maybe we'll start with you and the situation in Australia. Week to week, it's hard to know who is actually actively in charge. Is there a guiding philosophy at the moment about where the future of Australian rugby is going?
I don't think there is a guiding philosophy or direction around, our end game, around the two sides of the business. Okay, so the business of business and then the business of sport. It's a little bit different. Two bottom lines, financial bottom line on one side and emotional bottom line on the other, and they don't often and always run parallel, because teams may invest a lot in their efforts and may not get those rewards at the in the competition side of things. But I think our issue here has been about how we measure, I believe, obviously, and it's only my humble opinion, about how we measure success of the business. And I think that the success of the game traditionally was measured by participants. Right? Now, that may not seem like a very business type of thing to do, but those same participants are your customers at the end of the day. And I think now what we've done is we've started to focus too much on revenue, TV deals, ticket sales, etc., which are extremely important. but they're much easier to do and achieve good outcomes there and consequence of good outcomes there when you have a strong participant base, because those same participants, not all of them will end up in the elite level, and they'll all become fervent spectators, fervent fans, or part-time fans, according to the different levels of sport we have. And Super Rugby has been a consequence of that, because we've got bigger and bigger and bigger because we wanted more TV money, more TV money, more TV money. The fundamentals of the game, of the business, have, like any business here, aren't there, because we don't have any assets, no stadia. We don't own any competitions, really. Our local club competitions have even been disseminated amongst the different regional or political, state bodies or suburban bodies, etc. So the governing body has no assets. Now, players could be considered as an asset, but they're also a heavy cost as well. And with no transfer fees, players aren't really an asset. So we're running a business with no assets. And I know I'm talking a lot, but the reality is that we've had Super Rugby. It's been losing money for all the clubs hand over foot, and we've maintained our presence in that tournament.
That expansion of Super Rugby, has that led to some of this decline, or has it been mismanaged?
I think that the focus on the international game is a unique selling point for rugby. And I don't think that it should be ignored at all. In fact, I think that it's a huge sell compared to, for us, competing against League and AFL. The international part of our game is extremely valuable at the top end, but you've also got to have a strong functioning next tier, because not only is that your supporter base, but even for the development of players, this is not a business side of things. Yes, it's competition, you play against all these other teams that you're going to play against eventually, but the idea of playing Leinster-Munster, which you have played in many times, will, in front of a packed house with huge intensity, etc., prepare, and a sport that's followed prepares players better. Going to a test match where you've only got a three-quarter full stadium can almost be, or a half full stadium, can almost be a disadvantage to the home team, because you're quite deflated when you go out there. And therefore, participation and our connection to participation is key. It's not just, grassroots, and I get that whole thing, but if we're authentic in the way we deliver the game as a whole to our participants, then they will be there to support us. They'll be there to buy tickets, to buy merchandise, to wave the flag, to go on tour for the travel, all the things that derive different revenue streams. And then with the international game, which will be our profit driver, we prioritise where we put that money into the non-profitable sides of the game, which will then grow our participation and volunteer network and all the people who love the game. But I think the expansion side of things is important, but it needs to be, and is excellent to have, and does bring in a great revenue stream, but it has to be underpinned by a strong participation and involvement rate by people in the game.
Just before we go on to Andrew, I just wanted to ask one last bit on pay-per-view TV or subscription TV. And part of the view in England was that cricket pretty much fell off the face of the earth for participation once it went to Sky. Did that happen with Rugby Union in Australia?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll say that with a maximum respect to Fox. They've been an unbelievably great supporter of the game over many years. From right at the top, News Corp owners, they've invested millions and millions of dollars into the game. And you don't want to be disrespectful to that, but if you look here at Rugby League, they've been able to find the balance between a broadcast deal that allows them to be pay TV and free to wear, so that kids can have heroes I would say that during my tenure in the Wallabies, I would have had younger players coming through school, 14s and 15s, I would ask to come and bring down to training that they wanted to try to entice to rugby. And they literally wouldn't know any of the players bar the ones who had come from rugby league. Curtis Rona, Israel Folau, guys who had been there and they'd seen on free-to-air TV, because I think here in Australia it could be, and I might be wrong here, I can't say exactly, 28 to 30%. I think it's about 28% of the population have pay TV. So there's a whole range of people that aren't seeing the product, and that's for the development of the game as well. So some type of strong balance. And you're going to find, I think, in the next few days that the NRL are going to announce a mega deal, long-term with Fox, and also in a more shorter, medium-term deal with Channel 9, which is a free-to-air broadcast that allows them to give an excellent coverage and therefore have more and more people participating in one way or another, whether it's at games as junior rugby league, or on TV and therefore fans. So there is a way to do it. I think we probably go for the easy money sometimes. You know what I mean? And I understand why often, but these decisions are always about risk assessment inside of the boardroom, and you've got to make sure that the calculations are very, very clear when it comes to the decision you make, because they're pivotal decisions inside any game.
Andrew, what's the scenario like at the moment in New Zealand? Pardon me. Obviously, participation is never going to be an issue. It's such a part of the culture, but it seems as if the finances aren't quite as rudely healthy as they should be, given the playing base that they have in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a complicated issue. Part of the complication for rugby, I guess, is it's a global sport without really global numbers, not compared to soccer or to football, you know. So, you know, every country's got different advantages and weaknesses. You know, New Zealand's advantage, it's got a great brand. In terms of proportion of the population, it's got the lion's share of resources of kids coming through and playing the sport. It's got the support. What it doesn't have is a big economy. You know, we're not a big country in terms of our economy. We don't wield a lot of political power. You know, even with a really, really good brand as the All Blacks, we don't wield the power. Not that I think we should either, but we don't wield the power in world rugby. So our challenges are a little bit different. We've got good domestic strength in our competition, but we can't compete with, you know, players getting offered big contracts overseas. So that's traditionally been our challenge, of course. So it's a really complicated issue. Australia's different. Australia's got a much stronger overall economy. Whether rugby has got its share of that, obviously it doesn't. But it's got competing local sports, AFL and NRL, football now as well. So it's a really different environment over here. And part of the issue in Australia as well, where I'm living in Sydney, much as I keep connections obviously in New Zealand, is that it's a class game to a large extent in Australia. So whereas everyone in New Zealand plays it, over here it's much more seen as the private school sport. And as such, it's really hard for it to get a following outside of its player base, its traditional player base, which is the private schools in Sydney and Brisbane. You know, so as Cheik said, giving people access to the sport on TV, you don't get a lot of casual watchers in Australia of rugby. And such is the nature over here as well. It's quite fractious, where you've got people who are really dyed-in-the-wool club supporters. They tend not to be the ones who go and watch the Waratahs, for example. And the people who do go and watch the Waratahs locally here are probably unlikely to be the people who go and support their club fervently. So you've got a real kind of a divide in the support base here as well. And so, you know, the countries it's pretty complicated. New Zealand's going to benefit, I think, ultimately from a revamped Super Rugby. I think Australia will too. I've said for quite a while now that I think the competition, while it's expanded, it hasn't expanded in a sort of a consistent or a logical way that's scalable. It's just added a couple of teams here and there. You know, went to 14, went to 15, then it went to 18, dropped back down because that was crazy. It's a wonder they haven't tried a prime number yet. For you, Woody, prime number would be something like a 17 or a 13, mate. You know, divisible only by one in itself.
Thank you.
But it hasn't. It's still the hindrance in Super Rugby is there are games in Argentina now, which is, time zone is not great for New Zealand and Australia. Same with South Africa. Not many people are watching even their own teams play at 3 a.m. coming out of South Africa. So it's nothing against South Africa, but I think the competition would be much better, more localised into one time zone, expanding into Asia. That's where Australia can use, a bit more of an economic footprint into Asia, and New Zealand would benefit from that. I think it's been crazy somehow allowing Japan to slip out of the Sanzar competition, but if it means that Aussie and New Zealand and the islands and Asia get in together, then I think it could work well. And the logical place for South Africa, I think, to expand would be places like Dubai, or go into the same time zone and hit Barcelona, put a team there, that sort of thing. I've said constantly for the last sort of 5 years, I think that the competition in Super Rugby needs to change and needs to wipe out those big divides in terms of the time zone. South Africans jump up and down and say, "Oh, you hate South Africa." Well, no, I don't, other than the fact you beat me in '95 in the World Cup final. Saying that, I did more than my fair share for the Springboks that day anyway. But I don't hate South Africa at all. But what I'm concerned about is the rugby product. And I think that's suffering at the moment through the structure of Super Rugby. And I think one of the benefits of this COVID, like in a lot of industries and business as well, it has actually reset. Like Cheik said, I think right at the start, it's given everyone, or maybe Woody, it's given everyone a reset point to reevaluate and say, okay, how do we go forward now in an efficient way, in a really logical way, and make the most of what we have as a product.
I think Cheik touched on a point earlier on about the fact that as unions, the international game is the driver of nearly all the finance. The vast bulk of the money that comes into the game and out of the game comes through the international game. Super Rugby ended up being hemisphere, and in terms of player welfare, in terms of trying to play on the high veld 1 week or Argentina 2 weeks later, I mean, the amount of flights that have to go in there, and especially with what's happening now with COVID in terms of how difficult flying is going to be, will part of that reset mean that New Zealand will end up having their own competition, or would there be a trans-Tasman competition?
From my point of view, I can't speak for Cheik. I'd love to see a trans-Tasman or competition in this time zone. I don't know about you in terms of particularly your experience with coaching the Waratahs, how you've found those challenges travelling all around the world. Good for your air points.
No, I think I don't think all teams are hampered the same way by the travel. So I think I don't think that's a real issue. But the economics, this is where I fell out a fair bit with Australian rugby. I mean, it would have been a few years ago when they were doing the last TV, the next sort of arrangement of what Super Rugby was going to look like. I was adamant about changing towards trans-Tasman and Japan as well, because, number one, because we need to rebuild the supporter base, you've got to think that the Waratahs could play one game at home, be away for 5 weeks, get a couple of games at home, then have a break in June, which is no longer there. Now, you're running an events company, basically, if you're one of these teams in the management section of one of these teams that aren't in the high performance area. So you've got 8 1 year, maybe 7 in another, the way the competition's structured now, home games. The economics just don't match up. And then to keep the consistency of viewing, games, if you wake up in Ireland, you're watching Super Rugby all morning, then you're watching some rugby in South Africa in the afternoon, but then you're watching your own competition and the English and French all night. You've got non-stop rugby from the morning to the evening. Here, you've got the odd game punctuated in amongst rugby league and AFL games, which have their own channel basically on the pay TV provider. And the ability to build some continuity of fandom and following and support and sponsorship loyalty and return on investment for sponsors as well, which is what you want to do, it's nearly impossible. And to break even in a Super Rugby team, you have to have a home final, at least 1, if not 2. Right, that's based on the sort of Australian model. And the logical situation is that only one's going to get a home final. That's only because the competition forces it to be there. So you've got 4 other teams previously and now 3 that are guaranteed to lose money. And I don't understand how they can sustain that model. I don't know how I haven't been able to understand when I ask those questions in the rooms why we're keeping that model. As much as it's great, it's a great competition to play in, etc. But it's not sustainable, and so it's been proven before COVID-19 situation turned out. It's clearly proven because we're losing players at the rate of knots. The ability to keep our younger players out of the hands of NRL as well is very difficult, because I think there's probably 10 or 9 top line players in NRL that are all coming out of rugby schools. Yes, some of them were sent there from league to be put there for scholarships and stuff like that, but still, you've got them there in your hands. You can drive them. But we've just played along because we've had the and it's not easy to give up that nice lollipop, you know what I mean? That big TV money. But now it remains to be seen whether we'll be able to access those types of funds from the TV deal. And therefore, down here now, there's a lot of players on the move. Like, there's a lot of noise coming out of Europe about a lot of our players here who obviously got a lot of uncertainty, and therefore trying to get some certainty by looking elsewhere.
What's the club game like underneath the provincial setup?
Yeah, look, I think the club game I might be a little bit biased here because I come from that era, too. So, but I think that the club game is an essential part. It's the link between the professional game and the amateur game through the people who are crossing over through it, because players will cross through there. It's the only place players will really cross through to come and cross over between the amateur and the professional game. There's such a huge supporter base. When I say supporter base, maybe not turning up for massive crowds or anything like that, but volunteers, families of players, clubs who have got 5 and 6 grades turning up to play on the same day, 3 or 4 Colts teams, and we've paid zero respect to it. It's been handed off from team to team. I think from organisation to run. Rugby Australia is not even in charge of the Sydney or Brisbane competitions, for that matter. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that we had to pay someone to cover it. And then eventually those rights got taken. I think they've only just had to buy those rights back this year. The club game is, I think, when I talk about success being participation, I think it's instrumental for the core values of the game. We make up all these, plans with, these are the values of rugby. The values of rugby in Australia are right there in clubland. Guys who are working each day, just like it happened. I'm not saying, and the opportunity that one of those guys is going to get picked out and be playing professional rugby and make the dream happen, and his whole family's going to go there and it's going to be a great day. That's gone now. Where it was a great opportunity this year. I feel that they could have put aside the state teams and just put all the players back into their clubs and done a modified club rugby version, Sydney, Brisbane, whoever else, and then play a sort of national finals at the end. It's going to be a bit of a write-off no matter what. It's not going to be super rugby in itself. It's just going to be content for content's sake, to try and access some money from the broadcaster, and also to prepare players for Test rugby, which will hopefully take place later on in the year. But I feel like we need to look at the things. We need to prioritise certain things that we know could be almost like lost leaders for us, so that our stadium will be full, our team will be very strongly supported, no matter where it goes, and plays in Australia, and that it's almost like it's the connection point to our fan base.
That community-based, that community-based competition might have been a good way to give a rebirth to that. One thing that I'm interested in: who actually owns the Super Rugby franchises? Who's sitting and presiding over this loss-making team?
So the rugby in Australia, I don't know how it is in New Zealand. In Australia, the the governance can be a little bit complex. So Rugby Australia is an entity that then is made up of members from the different state unions. Okay, so in New South Wales Rugby Union own the licence to the Waratahs. They could choose to privatise that if someone wanted to take that licence on for a certain fee. In fact, it was licensed out to Waratahs Rugby for a fee, which they then, it was all the same people, but they sort of divided that way, professional game from community game. And, at the end of the day, the losses all come back to the Rugby Australia. All the money's coming. So the money comes from the different revenue streams. The out-and-out pay TV deal, which is linked into the collective bargaining agreement of players, is funneled through Rugby Australia, and an X amount goes to each province so that they can use for player payments up to a certain point, and then certain international players will get topped up from the national union, and then they'll also get a certain amount of money from Rugby Australia for development of the game in the state. But when it all comes back to it, if I turn up with a $3 million loss, it's RA who have to bail me out. And that's why, even though it might be $2 million from this team and $2 million from that team and $2 million from another team, it ends up being $6 to $8 million for Rugby Australia every year, in one way or another, no matter how you spin it.
How does it work in New Zealand? Who owns those teams?
Well, I better be careful what I say, because I'm fairly ignorant of the actual setup. I'm pretty sure it's a partially privatised model over there, where the New Zealand Union does have an equity stake in the 5 Super Rugby teams. There might be one which is completely privately owned, but at the end of the day in New Zealand, it's always been the way that it's been very centralised. So the New Zealand Rugby Union does hold the cards. The way the sport has developed in New Zealand with a small population, it's just made sense. It's been compelling for it to be centralised. There haven't been, there are there are parochialisms in terms of on the field, but off the field, it's always been, from the amateur era right through. In fact, the amateur era built that. It's about the game, and it's about the national body, and it's about the All Blacks, essentially. So everyone falls in behind that, and that's always been the way. Contract situation is, I think, still that the New Zealand Rugby Union has the main liability in terms of player contracts, and then they can sign individual Super Rugby contracts to top that up. But it's still New Zealand Rugby Union holding the cards, and it does work well for New Zealand. It's limiting, I guess, in some other ways, but it works for us in terms of the context that we're operating in a small population. But I mean, I can't see rugby in Australia being able to flourish, and I don't think Rugby New Zealand is going to be able to, develop as much as maybe we're developing nations without a strong world body, a strong world focus. And, I think, firstly, we've all got to recognise in the rugby world that the economies that do hold the cards there in World Rugby are England and France. They've got the money, they have got the political power. So we've actually got to recognise that. But I think those two powers particularly have to think outside of their own interests. I mean, the English Premiership can stand alone. If there was no other contact, the English Premiership would go well. It's a good competition, good system with feeder clubs and the different levels of play, whether regionally or nationally. France is the same. I mean, they've got 30 fully professional teams throughout their top 2 divisions. They could operate in their own right. I think they need to take on the responsibility, or have it told to them that if we really want to make this a world game, then we have to have a world structure. And that opportunity that World Rugby missed a couple of years back when it tried to talk to the Six Nations about maybe moving the tournament, they said no, and it all sort of fell through. But I think somewhere we've got to sit down and go, okay, what's best for the game? If the Six Nations is best played then okay, Southern Hemisphere nations, you need to get in and play your internationals at the same time. So throughout the world, we've got, whether it's 1 or 2 or whatever windows, where international rugby is being played. And then the lower levels can flourish outside of that, because internationals at the moment are dictating when Super Rugby gets played down here. That's dictating when any other provincial competitions get played, and that in turn affects the club games, and they don't get access. People don't see the Wallabies playing for Randwick anymore. They might this year if it gets started, of course, which would be nice. But they don't get to see that. And so I think when World Rugby can actually have the power, with obviously got to have buy-in from England and France predominantly, they need to construct a world structure that is scalable. So if you say, okay, in this time frame where Australia and New Zealand are playing and Japan plays and the islands or whatever, that this is a structure that can be built out eventually over time. What do we want the game to look like in 15 to 20 years? Because at the moment, we're still just adding bits to it. I'm curious, Woody, from your perspective, how that, whether you think the Pro 14 could exist completely standalone if it wasn't for contact with England and France in terms of the European Cups and stuff like that. How does that go from a revenue generation perspective?
Yeah, I think it makes it into, I think we're kind of circling around a thing that we've circled around for a few weeks, actually. So I don't think the Pro 14 stands on its own at all. I don't think it has fully worked as a competition. And actually, what it tried to do was mirror what Super Rugby has done, which is to have South African teams and to have Italian teams, which you can understand because it's the Six Nations, but actually geographically it just makes things a little bit awkward, and they haven't had any success within the competition. So I don't know that fits fully well. For me, the idea of World Rugby's debate a couple of years ago about a global season, I think we try and put everything that we already have pre-existing, and we try and then work a season around it. And I think that's too awkward and too uncomfortable. We may well have too many competitions. So because of that, we've players playing too many. You have no downtime. You have no potential downtime. You have to have larger squads. They're more expensive. You have longer levels of travel. And when in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly, Michael, they play an awful lot more. As you know, they play an awful lot more than they do in the Southern Hemisphere. And so that travel does exact a toll on players. If the European competition became a sort of knockout competition that wasn't 6 or 8 weekends or 10 weekends that are suddenly taken up, that it is only for the teams that get to the end, or if Super Rugby was something similar on the back of national competitions, or if you had a British and Irish league instead of the Premiership and the Pro 14, and you amalgamated some of those, I think you free up another 5 or 6 weekends a year, and I think that actually makes it more sustainable. But it's trying to shoehorn different competitions, different vested interests into it. And I don't know necessarily that World Rugby spent a huge amount of time talking to the Premiership and to the French. They tend to dictate to them. They don't take that very well, to be honest. So I do think that there is a potential to be done there. But for me, it has to be that professional rugby is under one group in England and under one group in France. If you have the Premiership fighting with the IRFU all the time, you're going to get vested interest, and that needs to be combined somehow. And actually, if that happens, I also think it stops some of the player drain from some of the other countries for the Southern Hemisphere, because more things are aligned if that is the case. It isn't just whether the club wins, it is also whether England wins.
Michael, I'm interested in what you think of the arrival of CBC onto the scene and the money that they're pumping in. Like Andrew makes the point about these very strong leagues in England and France, but if it wasn't for the CBC money, most of the teams in the Premiership in England would technically have recorded a loss last year. I think only one of them would have ended up being able to stand alone at break even or making a profit. So the league does require investment, and with the money coming in, you can see that the power dynamic between the league and the RFU is only going to continue to be contentious.
Yes, the CBC investment into Formula One, I totally understood, and it was a very successful operation for them in the end. After I think they sold out to Liberty in the end. Rugby, I'm gathering that their investment into, and I wouldn't have no idea, but I'm gathering their investment into the Premiership is a stepping stone towards investing into the international game, where they can truly maximise the skill set that they bring to the business of sport around the commercialisation, the maximising the commercialisation of the product. In regards to teams recording losses, it's different. And I've worked in both of these environments, right? So the privately owned outfit as opposed to the federation-owned outfit are two totally different animals. Now, I think in France they have it worked out in the way that at the end of the season they have a financial body that overlooks all the teams. If Team X records a $10 million loss on their books, then Team X's owner has to put that $10 million in before they are given the permission to play in that same league again the next season. They can be relegated financially at the end of any year if they don't make their books balance. Now, if a private owner is wanting to invest that type of money, then I say go for it. The more money you can have in the game from privateers, I don't see what the issue is at all. But we try to play in this halfway house of, well, we want to bring in private money, but we want to then put salary caps, and we want to regulate wealthy owners that are coming into the game. And I think that just doesn't make sense to me. It's yes, we want investment, but yeah, now you invest on our terms, and it usually is a control play of some sort by the people who run the leagues, so the owners don't end up taking over, I suppose. But at the end of the day, the owners of clubs should own the league because it's their bodies on the line, when it comes down to that. Now, loss making in federation-owned business is different because federation-owned teams are generally, and if I'm trying to think of them all now in my head, they're generally all tailored towards the success of the national team. So in Ireland, Irish Rugby will tell Leinster, you can play these guys for these games, you can't play them for these. I don't know the ins and outs of it all now, but yeah, I'm sure Keith will know, you guys know a bit. And they're tailoring that. And at the other end of that, they're giving them more resources to bring in players, and they put them into a competition that can sort of handle that. They're in a competition on a regular basis that can handle that type of drain back and forward. So the assets of the union will generally decide how they manoeuvre these things. And most successful sporting teams are going to have for the balance sheet, I should say, they're going to have some type of significant asset profile. So owning of stadia, owning of other revenue streams that may not even be related to rugby, you know what I mean? So there's a lot that you can do when you've got the arena and the facility around, different revenue streams. So the actual differences in, the profit and loss end at the end of the year, I think you can ride that out as long as there's a standard that needs to be met and say, well, you need to fill that hole every year before you can pick up and run again the next year. I think that's pretty standard fare, I'd say.
Andrew, you seem pretty pessimistic about the future of Australian rugby.
Well, no, I don't know if I am pessimistic. I don't think it probably could go any worse. But I think it's largely because just the stakeholders of the sport are all on different pages, and there are so many different pages. And I think, like with anything, coming together and finding some sort of a compromise in a positive sense rather than a negative, rather than, compromise being nothing good at all. I think a compromise in world rugby as well as Australia, the Australian context, is coming to the table thinking, I'm actually prepared to concede a little bit. I'm actually prepared to think of what's better broadly, that we might all benefit from this sport rather than just my little vested interest here. So when you sit down thinking about world rugby, what would we like to see? What's been good for rugby? As you said, internationals have been a huge part of that, and tours have been a big part of that. Now, I'm not saying I want to see a tour every year for every team, but when you look at the fervour that the Lions brings out in the host country as well as people coming across, I think there's still a significant role to play for tours. Now, whether that's when the Lions go to South Africa next year, that New Zealand and Australia, one tours the other. I mean, these days you can take two entirely different teams, one team to play the Saturday games, one entirely different team touring. People aren't going to know the difference, but the All Blacks go up and play in Tamworth and down at Albury or Moree, or I'm trying to think of a few other towns, Bathurst, Toowoomba. I think there's a room for tour there, but we need to have a window for those opportunities to do that, Northern and Southern Hemisphere as well. So we need to sit down and say, okay, firstly, we want to have tours, we want to have availability of international windows. Secondly, what happens under that? We need to have regional competitions. We can't afford to have a Super Rugby. I mean, you said before the geographical challenges, Woody, of going across to Italy. Now, you consider if you were playing in the Pro 14, had to go and play in Chicago and then, come back home, play another game and then go off and play in Singapore. So that's the Super Rugby challenges as well. So I think developing a structure worldwide that allows you to have conferences in the same time zone. Now, in the European and South African time zone at the moment, you might be able to get together 6 or 7 conferences. In New Zealand, in the Asian time zone, you might only have 1 at the moment. You certainly only have 1 in the Americas. But I think that's the kind of structure and format that we sort of need. And then under that, looking at how we foster the level below that as well. So, I mean, it's easy for me to say. Just get a few people around the table and get them all willing to concede a little bit. But I think that's what we need to look at and go, where do we see rugby being in 15, 20 years? If we consider it a global sport, we need to put a World Cup in the United States. That's the reality of it. Look how successful it was in Japan. Fantastic. We've got to get to the United States. But how do we structure this so we can actually scale the game within that framework?
And yet, in the midst of all that, the 2 guys who were going for chairman of World Rugby both said that they wanted to make the game simpler and larger. They wanted to bring it to absolutely everywhere. But that becomes very, very difficult when the key components, the key countries are suffering at this stage.
Mate, I think we're one thing I hear, like we're talking about a lot of different ideas, and etc. By nature and by demographic, people who are leading rugby are not entrepreneurial. They're conservative. They don't want to be accountable for, I took this risk and it didn't happen because, the guys that used to pat him on the back may not pat him on the back the next time he goes into that room, you know what I mean? I think we're not thinking entrepreneurially about the opportunities for the game. The game can do anything. Our game is international. It's also local. We are so lucky to have that opportunity, and it's about being entrepreneurial in the way we think, and the way we approach even just the simplest of ideas. And I know Andrew's trying to talk about a few times around putting the season, the international windows all together to create more. It's absolute logic, but we seem to struggle with it. And if you asked anyone, they wouldn't be able to tell you why, because it's like turning around an ocean liner, you know what I mean, and make a decision to say, okay, we'll play the Rugby Championship in February and March while you're playing the Six Nations, and then we'll play in October and November, and then all that time in the middle, you can play like that. For us here, I believe, is brilliant, because what will happen is rugby will be played, you'll be playing the grand finals of rugby at the same time as you'll be playing the grand finals of AFL and Rugby League, which is the big, that September time in Australia is when everyone gets, fired up for finals footy, and you can have great competition. You can have strong club competition in different times as well. You can just that logic alone. And the lack of entrepreneurship has not even allowed us to get to that point where we can just put and I know it's difficult to change. I really do, especially for the North, where it's very successful, financially successful. But I don't think the North really has to change a whole lot. I think that concept of us playing in February, March sort of internationals, and then those internationals in October, November, or whenever they are, I don't know, that you pick those windows and everyone plays at the same time. It seems pretty simple, but we like to make it look like it's complicated. It's just a matter of saying, this is what we want to do because of X, Y, and Z outcomes. And you've got to sell. You get nothing unless you sell. You know what I mean? We've got no God-given right to be given money because we play rugby union. We've got to sell what we've got and say, this is why this game is hot. Check it out. These games are going to be unbelievable. They're going to do this and sell, because that's what people who are hungry do. Here, you look at NRL, the guy came out, the chairman said, we're back May 28, like ages ago. And everyone told him, no, what are you talking about, blah, blah. They'll be kicking off next Thursday, all going well. And it just comes back to saying, I've got ambition, I'm selling my vision, and I'm going to do it. And that's all you've got to do.
I can understand why Northern Hemisphere people might say, well, why the hell do we have to play the season through the Southern Hemisphere winter? You know, play in June, July, August, that's our summer months and whatever. That to me is not about Southern Hemisphere. It's just a meteorological reality that Southern Hemisphere, okay, yes, Dunedin gets a few cold nights. You've been down there, Woody. You've got to find, you know, you've got to be fairly creative to stay warm on a night like that down in Dunedin, but we don't get those really bleak, bitterly cold like Northern Europe or whatever in the winter. I think it is, you take out the Christmas complication potentially if you're playing through that season. I don't know what the feedback has been like generally in Europe about those Rugby World Cup warm-up games, because from the Southern Hemisphere's perspective, we look at Edinburgh in blazing sunshine and a great crowd and good footy. You know, the days of playing in the middle of winter so that, you know, the big forward packs can roam around these muddy pitches, they're gone. All the pitches are beautiful, as you know now. I mean, I never got dirty for starters, but I certainly wouldn't these days playing on the pitch. So that argument's sort of taken out a little bit, and I think you can still have, that's why rules are important, to let the big guys still have their roles in the game. You don't want everybody sort of looking the same shape and running around on fast tracks just because of that. So you need to have a role for the big guys. But I think playing on good tracks makes a lot of sense when the Southern Hemisphere doesn't get quite as cold as the Northern Hemisphere. And, you know, if you're looking to expand the game and have, you know, the likes of Russia who have obviously played in a few World Cups, Scandinavia, I mean, their build is ideal for rugby, you would have thought. You know, playing throughout the summer, I would have thought, brings more of those Northern Hemisphere nations into our sport.
For me, there was one of the issues that happened, the first game that was cancelled because of coronavirus. To try and find a window to put it back in, there was maybe one weekend in the whole year in 2020. That's how jam-packed the season is, because they still thought there was going to be a summer tour. And they also then thought that the guys need a few weeks off and then they get back into it. So you're pretty much talking going up to a World Cup on the back of a Lions tour. A Northern Hemisphere player could play for 48 weeks of the year. That is not sustainable, irrespective of financials or anything else that are within it. It's a tough game. If you look at NFL, the regular season is maybe 16 games with a few more at the end of it. And I know that's a different game, but there are elements of that that are important. But I don't think you'll find any consensus by everybody, because I think we maybe have a couple of too many tournaments, or those tournaments are too big because they have to justify the television monies, or they have to justify having larger squads. So the idea in many respects is we've gone so big because it's been a bit fragmented. And I would agree with you, Michael, the idea of having an entrepreneurial view into the game, it isn't just to have an entrepreneurial view on one tiny part of it. It has to look at the whole thing. But we can't look at the whole thing if everybody keeps what they already have.
Yeah. And I think this is where the selling comes in. So immediately I go, okay, well, you're going to ask the Europeans to play in the summer. Everyone goes on their holidays. The TV broadcaster does not want that. Probably doesn't think that that's the right place to be playing it, to be playing it because of the ratings and the advertising money, etc., etc. But that's where the sell comes in. The overall sell about what the game can give you as a whole, not just that more equals more, because it's proven here that more does not equal more. More games, more teams, more does not bring you more success from a television rating point of view or from a crowd rating point of view. It's about how the quality of what you do. So if you're going to have 10 home games, you want them home, away, home, away, home, away, home. So you've got some continuity. Or, yes, if we play in this period, it may not be the perfect time, but then you're going to get this in that period, which is going to sell better for you, or a global internet. And that's where selling comes in. And that's when you're not entrepreneurial, when you're more, how do I say it, institutional, like I'd say rugby is at the administrative level, then that's what you get. We'll play more and we'll get more money. But eventually, quality drops. People don't know where to watch. What's this comp here? Who are these guys? What's what's this? We get stuck between some form of development and competition, and it loses meaning. And that's what people want to watch and be a part of, is meaningful competitions.
Andrew, could I just sum up? You were saying a calendar season, so the 2021 season would start for all the franchises at the same time around the world, the various leagues, whatever conference they're in, would start in January and, let's say, finish in September. And in the midst of that, you'd have 6-week break for an international window where the Six Nations will be played and the Rugby Championship will be played. And there might be a tour at the end of that year or somewhere else along in between. And the next season starts the following year. Is that oversimplifying? But that's
no, absolutely. However it's carved up, I just think the sport needs a global season for it to flourish at the developing nations, for it to flourish at the levels under in every nation under the professional competitions and whatnot, and for the ability to schedule what we like about rugby, to have tours having a place. It might be that we have to really work on the Lions has developed now into an every 4 years, which it has been probably for, I guess, 32, maybe 36 years, that it's every 4 years. It didn't used to be exactly every 4 years, did it? In fact, they didn't even probably used to tour Australia. But anyway, that's evolved to that. And I think there's no reason why we can't put in look, here's a 20-year structure here. Who's touring when? Maybe 12 years. Who's touring when? But I think that the parties need to come with a little bit of concession. And from our perspective in New Zealand, look, we've always said the All Blacks need to play in New Zealand to be eligible for selection. And that's to counter, the potential to lose them all and they all go and play, where our people can't see them easily without getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning or getting home at 2 or 3 in the morning. We've always said we'll only select them from in New Zealand. I think as the development of the game goes and we push into Asia, into big economies, even if we get a small slice of that, I think New Zealand says, well, okay, we're happy to accept selecting All Blacks so long as they're playing in our time zone. And so they can take their IP into new franchises, whether it's in Kuala Lumpur or Tokyo or Singapore or Hong Kong or wherever. And that's a way New Zealand can concede and say, look, this is for the development of the global game. So I think everybody needs to come in saying, okay, we might all have to give a little bit here, but at least being prepared to listen to other people's perspectives. I don't think that happens a lot.
And South Africa as part of the European bloc, essentially, where, again, everybody can watch it here or in South Africa, it's no problems.
Yeah, and you might devise a playoff system potentially. I mean, you might end up with something like 6 12-team conferences throughout the world. If we can get 72, if you only start with 5 12-team competitions, but that has the potential to expand. So I don't know. I mean, however it's carved up, I just believe, firstly, that New Zealand and Australian teams underneath the international teams need to be playing in a time zone, their own time zone. I think to develop the game in the States, there needs to be a conference well and truly supported over there. They've tried several times to get it off the ground. Looks like one has really caught on now. They've got sort of, I think, 14 kind of professional clubs in the United States. So that needs to be supported as well. But I just go back to my fundamental point. The sport, to grow, needs to have a global season.
Yeah, Keith, that all makes sense to kind of bring this back around. Like, it's the old farts, to coin Will Carling's phrase, in European rugby that might prevent the global season ultimately from happening.
Yeah, I don't know that it has to be. It's funny. I know an awful lot of the old farts. I would have said that a lot of them started in the amateur days. A lot of them were there for the right reason. Some of them are still there for the right reason. I do think it's a very slow moving ship. I think you called it a superliner or a super tanker earlier on, Michael. I do think there is a possibility for change, because the truth of it is there's no point if Ireland come out of COVID, they're still going to struggle very heavily because there's a huge impact on finances. But if Ireland come out in a strong position in a couple of years' time and none of the other countries do, that's of no value or benefit either. Ireland are not a powerhouse. The powerhouses are France and England, but they are the most fractious. So that's where the issue actually comes with it. And the one point we haven't actually talked about is if the game does have to shrink a little bit to be able to be viable and sustainable, is that going to have an impact on player salaries? And will there have to be a reduction that's happening across in there? Or is it just going to be smaller squads? So there are an awful lot of moving parts. But I would say that there is some movement, for the people that I consistently speak to, because we've been at this now for a little while, but we can't have an argument all the time. I played the Premiership as soon as the game went professional, and every year there was a potential of a strike and a fight and an argument, and because there was a huge amount of vying, because we're still an incredibly small and young professional sport.
Was that just at home, Woody, before you went out to train first thing in the morning?
That was absolutely for certain, yeah. And well, you were there afterwards, actually. Thankfully, we didn't cross over. We could have been dangerous together at Queen's. But there is the sense that the game still isn't right. So the representative route, where the unions own or have a controlling stake in the provinces, is considered to be a very good model, and it is a good model. But it isn't the only model, and it doesn't have to be the right model. But all the models need to be able to work together. And at the moment, I don't know whether it's envy or protecting your own nest or whatever it is that's happening. But I don't think there's any level of consensus, because nobody wants to give any ground on what they actually presently own. And for the game to be, I would say, seriously sustainable, it can't have clubs paying huge salaries to extract players from other places. It can for a couple, and it should always have a few that are in there, because you want to have the best players playing wherever you can, but they can't be doing it that's totally knocking a Southern Hemisphere team and taking away whatever assets that they have. So it's trying to get the balance within all that, and nobody's come up with any good solution for it. So any conversation that's happened with World Rugby has never found any level of consensus. But they only got excited when they saw the size of the economic pie, whereas we're saying we actually want the game to be a fully sustainable game, so we can have meaningful rivalries and things that you actually want people to get up and watch. You want people to go and see, and you want to see the community game be heavily supported, because we may get the professional game right, but unless the structures are put in to make certain that it's going to be right in 20 years' time because of the kids who are watching it, well, then that would be a false gift for us, I think.
100%. Lads, you've been great with your time. Andrew Mehrtens, Michael Cheika, thanks a million for joining us on episode 3 of Keith Wood's State of the Union. We've really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.